Okay, I'd like to call to order the Finance Committee meeting of August 17th at approximately 5:01 PM. Can I have a roll call, please?
Yes, you can. That'll be Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Here.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Here.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Present.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Here.
and Counselor Ramon Tiger Beta.
Here. Okay, we have a quorum. Then the next item is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes from staff?
No changes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, changes from the committee. Can I have a
Move to
motion?
approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
and Counselor Ramon Tiger Beta.
Yes. Okay, next is approval of the consent agenda. Items to be removed from the consent agenda. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to remove 7A for discussion and item C. And I'd like to co-sponsor D as in dog. Thanks.
Okay, is there any other items that need to be pulled that haven't been already? Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Yes, that'll be Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez, and Counselor Ramon Tiger Beta.
Yes. Okay, our next item is approval of the minutes. We will start with the Finance Committee meeting minutes of July 20th, 2020. Are there any changes from staff?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
Changes from the committee? Can I have
Move
a
to
motion?
approve.
Second.
A motion and a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Counselor Ramon Tiger Beta.
Yes. Okay, item B is the minutes from the Finance Committee meeting of August 3rd, 2020. Are there changes from staff?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
and Counselor Ramon Tiger Beta.
Yes. Okay, the minutes from the budget hearing on July 20th, 2020, changes from staff.
No changes, Mr. Chair.
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, can I have a roll call?
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Counselor Ramon Tiger Beta.
Yes. Okay, the budget hearing minutes of July 21st, 2020.
No changes, Mr.
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, can I have a roll call?
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Counselor Ramon Tiger Beta.
Yes, budget hearing minutes from July 22nd, 2020.
No changes from staff, Mr. Chair.
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, roll call.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signey Lindell,
yes,
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Counselor Ramon Tiger Beta.
Yes. Okay, budget hearing minutes, July 23rd, 2020.
No changes from staff, Mr. Chair.
move to approve.
Second.
Okay, roll call.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signey Lindell,
Yes,
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Counselor Ramon Tiger Beta.
Yes. Budget hearing minutes of July 24th, 2020.
No changes from staff, Mr. Chair.
Move to approve.
second,
Okay, roll call.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signey Lindell,
yes,
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
and Counselor Ramon Tiger Beta.
Yes. Approval of the budget hearing minutes from July 27, 2020.
No
Mr.
changes
Chair?
from staff, Mr.
Yes.
I have changes.
Okay, Councilwoman Romero Worth.
On page 1, under approval of the agenda, which is item number 3, it says that Counselor Vihil Coppler abstained. And this continues to be a problem actually throughout these minutes and into the next. She is not a member of this committee, so I don't know. I would ask the city attorney, if you're not a member of the committee, can you abstain from the vote? She's also not reflected as being, I'm sorry, as being in attendance or as a member present.
Chairman Abeyta, Councilor Merriworth, I agree with your assessment. She can't abstain if she's not eligible to vote.
So on page 1, on item 3, abstain, Vihil Coppler needs to be deleted. On page 2, item 5B, actually, let's go back. Item 5A, under abstain, Counselor Vihil Coppler needs to be deleted. Also, Counselor Abeyta, did you abstain from the approval of the municipal court budget? I don't remember anybody abstaining about anything, but,
No, I did not.
okay, so I think to properly reflect what happened, Counselor Abeyta they should check Counselor Abeyta's vote, or maybe Counselor Abeyta remembered.
No, I voted for approval of it.
Okay, on 5B, city clerk, Counselor Vihil Coppler abstaining should be deleted. Let's see, 5C, again, same problem. Counselor Abeyta and Counselor Vihil Coppler were recorded as abstaining. Vihil Coppler should be deleted. Counselor Abeyta seconded the motion, so I can't imagine that he abstained from the vote. This probably
Right.
needs to be removed. And then on 5D, again, Counselor Vihil Coppler deleted from abstaining. And then I would move for approval.
Second.
Move
Okay,
to approve amended.
Okay, so yeah, we have a motion and a second as amended. Can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signey Lindell,
yes,
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Counselor Ramon Tiger Beta.
Yes. Okay, approval of the budget hearing minutes from July 28th, 2020. Are there changes from staff?
Mr. Changes, no chair.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councilwoman Romero Worth.
So I have similar issues on these minutes. Item 3, approval of the agenda. Counselor Vihil Coppler should be deleted from abstaining. Hold on. There was a motion to approve the public utility budget. It's not numbered, but it reflects Counselor Vihel Coppler abstaining on page 3. That should be deleted. Also, on request for approval of the operating budget, item 6, Counselor Vihel Coppler should be deleted as abstaining. And then I would move for approval as amended.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Hold on, I think we
Second.
may have missed one. It looks like on, where is it? For BDD, to approve the BDD staff recommended city,
Yep, you're right. Sorry.
we need to, Vihel Coppler's on abstain there, so we need to remove that one as well.
Okay, so Councilwoman Romero Worth, will you restate your motion?
If we could move to approve as amended with all of the abstentions by Counselor Vihel Coppler in the minutes on July 28th being removed.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second,
Okay, can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
yes.
Counselor Roman Tiger Abeyta.
Yes. Okay, so that concludes the approval of the minutes. We are now on to approve. Did someone say something?
I did, Mr. Chair, just a point for the budget hearings, meeting minutes for July 24th. There are a couple abstentions for that might not be accurate. One is Vihel Coppler, and just to double check with my colleague, there was an abstention from Councilwoman Cassett Sanchez.
No, I did not abstain from anything. Thank you for checking.
So we have to reconsider July 24th meeting minutes.
Okay, can we have a motion to reconsider those?
Move to reconsider.
Second.
Second,
Okay, can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
yes.
Counselor Roman Tiger Abeyta.
Yes, and can I have a motion now to reapprove the budget hearing minutes from July 24th?
I move to amend, move to approve with amendments, taking off Counselor Vihel Coppler as abstention vote, and also on F, it's an abstention that was 4, I'm assuming. Counselor Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
4F.
for F, thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Yes. Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Counselor Roman Tiger Abeyta.
Yes. Okay, so now we could move on to the items that were pulled off the consent agenda. The first is item A, which is a request for the approval of the 2018 State Homeland Security Grant Program Sub-Grant Amendment to extend the period of performance through September 30th, 2020, New Mexico Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple questions. So this is an extension of a grant, State Homeland Security Grant Program that's extending to September 2020. What staff person is going to be speaking on this?
Chair, Councilor Villarreal, Kyle Mason here, Emergency Management Director. I also have members of the police department as well on standby.
Excellent. Thank you for being here. Just wanted to check with this because there wasn't very many details in the memo or in the packet material about the eligible expenditures that are approved through this grant, and in particular the 66,000 that it will be expended, or the remaining amount. It states that the amount will go towards Homeland Security related improvements to the police department's intelligence center, but it doesn't give any details as to what that entails. Can you give us more details about what kind of improvements there will be as it relates to the intelligence center? And actually, can you explain what the intelligence center is, or not you specifically, but maybe somebody from the department? Thank you.
Yes, I'd like to, Chair, Councilor Villarreal, I'd like to yield to Captain Tapia.
Oh, Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal. So the Intel Center is a unit we have in our Criminal Investigations Division that gathers intelligence and supports our other criminal investigations, as well as the police department in whole. They're the ones that manage our mobile video trailers, as well as the other support for our investigations. So this, on this extension, what we're looking at is expanding a tool in our toolbox. So the one thing that we're asking, there were two outstanding items that were never purchased on this original grant. One of them is an IBM software that we realized that our intelligence center isn't fully equipped to use, so we went ahead and pulled that off of our request. The second one that we are looking for on this request was a company called Boundless Security Camera Systems. That company no longer is in operation, so we went and found another vendor called CrimePoint, and we're looking at getting what's called a Hermit camera system that would support, similar to our MVTs, our mobile video trailers, in surveillance equipment that could be utilized for our investigations.
So just to elaborate on that, the mobile video trailers, they use specific software. So you all, the IBM software wasn't compatible or was compatible?
So the IBM software was a system that was for intelligence gathering for large scale terrorism and like tax evasion and all that. When we looked at it recently, it was not something that fit into what our intelligence center does, and it wasn't a practical system for us to use here. It's separate from the software we use for our mobile video camera systems.
So with this remaining amount, you will, so Boundless Security is out, but a new company called, what is it, what'd you call it again? Sorry, give me the name again.
Yeah, Chair Bita, Councilor Villarreal. It's the company is CrimePoint, but the device, the camera system, is called a Hermit Cam.
Okay, so how does that then connect to the mobile video trailers? So the Hermit camera, is that something that you can add on to the existing trailers, or is it a completely separate technology?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal, it's a separate operating system. What this is, it's a different tool for our toolbox. What this device is, it's a device that's designed and engineered specifically for law enforcement for a low profile deployment, different than the overt deployment of the camera trailers. This is equipped with a full pan tilt zoom camera that can be mounted on a pole that's in a certain area. It can be placed mounted inside of a vehicle or placed in other areas where the traditional camera trailers would not fit or be practical.
So it's smaller and it's can go on various, like you said, low profile deployments versus the larger mobile video trailers that are pretty obvious. I mean, you can see them and you know where they're at, but these ones are a little bit more just, I guess, maybe you could tell me more about that.
Sure. Mr. Chair, Counselor Villarreal. Yes, this is, it's a battery operated, unlike the mobile video trailers that operate off of the hybrid battery and the generators. This one's a very small design. The camera uses a space of about half a deck of cards for the camera to be used, but the device is about the size, if you've seen like a pedestal, like the phone pedestals that they have where the equipment is, or a small electrical box. That's the size of it, and it's used to be deployed remotely without having to be attached to power. It can be viewed remotely. It uses a cell service, so we can view it and operate it remotely, download the videos remotely, but it's a very low profile that can be placed in areas such as, like recently, the concerns that were brought up on some of the walking trails. This would fit perfectly in those types of investigations, so we can place it up in a place where this very large trailer would not fit, wouldn't be practical to gather intelligence and build our cases.
Thank you. That was helpful to give us an example of where it could be utilized. And that is an area that I think both Councilor Lindell and I are concerned about. Just checking with the amount, the 66 remaining, what portion goes to pay for the Hermit camera, or is that all, that full amount for the camera?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal, the estimate, the quote that we received for this Hermit camera and the supporting equipment was $16,817, which was actually much cheaper than the original request with Boundless Systems, which was a little over $20,000. And we decided not to go with the larger purchase of the IBM software, which was the $26,000.
And then the remaining amount, because this is 66,000, what else is it going towards? Does that go towards Crime Point and their contract, or?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal, the only request that we had at this point for this extension was the Crime Point. The remaining balance, we didn't request any other items.
Thank you for that. So Mr. Mason, what is the remainder going to be used for?
Councilor Chairman Abeyta, Councilor Villarreal, the budget breakdown at this time, the only expense that we're able to, with the current quotes that we have and the time frame that we were allowed from the State Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, is the purchase that Captain Tapia is referencing. We do have other items that when we started the grant, since this is a grant extension, we are extending the entire grant. We can't pick out the one project that we have the intent to use. The other items, there is no anticipated expenditures other than the $16,000 odd that Captain Tapia has outlined.
So no, not new purchases or new expenses. You just have to report it that way?
Could you?
I'm just trying to think of, like, the way it was described to us, it made it sound like there was a balance and you were able to, we want to expend the remaining balance of the grant. And I thought it was 66,000.
Chair Abeyta and Councilor Villarreal, to quote the memo, this will allow the city to expend some of the remaining $66,697.12.
Okay, and then so the remainder, does that just roll back to Homeland Security, or what happens to?
Yeah, unfortunately, it does end up going back to the federal share and potentially redistributed through future dispersions of this annual grant. But at this time, if it isn't expended, it isn't returned because it is a reimbursement-based grant. It's not something that we have to forfeit back.
Got it. Thanks for the clarity. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Okay, anything else from the Finance Committee? Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Second,
Okay, we have a motion, second. Any further discussion? Can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signey Lindell,
yes,
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Counselor Roman Tiger Abeyta.
Yes. Okay, the item passes. And that brings us to item C, which is consideration of bill number 2020-20, an ordinance relating to creating efficiencies, enhancing effectiveness, and eliminating silos by reorganizing certain city departments, organizing the Economic Development Division, Affordable Housing Office, Land Use Department, Tourism Santa Fe Department, Recreation Division, and the Arts and Culture Department as divisions of a Community Development Department, organizing the Community Services Department, Police Department, Fire Department, and Office of Emergency Management as divisions of a Community Health and Safety Department, and placing the Constituent and Council Relations Department into the City Clerk's Office, amending 2.6-3, replacing Section 2-8 SFCC 1987 with a new Section 2-8 SFCC that establishes all city departments, reorganizing existing Sections 2-8, 2-14, 2-15, 2-19, and 2-10 as subsections of the new Section 2-9, establishing an ordinance, the existing Information Technology and Telecommunications Department and the Constituent and Council Services Department, and repealing the sections of Chapter 2 that establish departments that are either becoming divisions or no longer exist. Sections 2-9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 16, 19, 21, and 23 SFCC 1987, amending Section 2-22 SFCC 1987 to provide contract internal audit functions, and amending Sections 26-1.6 and 26-3.5 regarding the Office of Affordable Housing. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm having a little bit of a technical problem with PrimeGov, but I'm seeing part of the notes that I made to the document. I guess just overall, I did want to say that the original wording of this ordinance, not the changes, not the suggested or proposed reorg, but I'm just talking about the original language, is really out of date. There's just so many things that I think this particular document, removing the reorg part of it, has to be cleaned up. So I don't know what the best way to get those to Jesse, and I'll just give you certain examples. I think that our attorney did provide some language changes that would make some of the language gender neutral or not gender specific. There's a lot of his, he throughout the document, but I did find more. So we need to adjust those accordingly.
On
Not
that
sure.
point, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Councilwoman Romero Worth.
So I can understand why you would want to do that, and especially in these times. But I would ask the city attorney whether our ordinances generally refer to the he as being, I don't know what the right word is, gender neutral, even though we know it's not.
We've actually made those adjustments in the past.
Have we?
Yeah.
Because I know at the state level, they say he, even though it's outdated, and I just wonder
Sure.
if we have some sort of governing overarching rule on this.
So, Chairman Abeyta and Councilor Villarreal, or councilors, the legislature passed something recently to do more gender neutral systematically. We don't have a drafting book for the city. It's something I think that we probably should develop. So I think we'd be happy to change the gender neutral. Actually, Chief Padilla is the one who caught the policeman references and recommended they be changed to police officer, which I appreciated. Mostly, so for this, we can make those technical changes, I think. Mostly what we did was take the existing language, and since it's all moving to a new section, we just took it in mass There was a lot of technical details even just doing that. So I think we just probably didn't get to that level.
Okay.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we didn't have some overarching rule that spoke to this. So thank you, Counselor, for letting me interject.
Sure. Yeah, so those are just things I noticed. And then like workman's comp, we don't call that workman's comp, it's workers' compensation. But those are just minor details that if we're gonna amend aspects of this substitute bill, we need to add those pieces to it. And I don't know what's the best way to get those to Jesse. But the other thing I was trying to figure out is the inconsistencies of descriptions. It's hard to, what I was noticing in this is there's some sections of some departments that are very sparse. They have like a couple sentences to describe what it is. And then there's others that are very long and detailed, specifically the police department. And I guess my question for that section is they talk a lot about the reserve. I didn't even know we had a reserve option. And I'm wondering if that needs to be amended at some point too. It just seemed like, I didn't know if that was still germane to the city's function. I'm not sure who could answer that question.
Councilor Abeyta, Councilor Villarreal, I can address it. So basically, the only things we changed substantively beyond the reorg were things that were either essentially, we knew they were illegal essentially. So the volunteer fire department firefighters, their union agreement disallows having volunteer firefighters. So that's why we took that out, because the council's essentially already agreed not to have them. So there really wasn't a policy issue there. So we tried not to really do policy changes beyond what was in the caption. And the purpose is really to just do the reorg and to clean up things that are absolutely incorrect. So we get like the workers' comp work, that we can make that kind of change because it's not substantive, right? It's just changing actual legal terms that we know are already changed. But we could do a whole cleanup of the police section in a separate bill. It just wouldn't really relate to the reorg. And we don't have a reserve currently. Chief Padilla and I did speak about that. But whether or not it's actually not allowed to have a reserve, I don't know. And I haven't done that research or looked into whether anyone does that in the state or what the history is. It's kind of an entirely new topic that we didn't get to at this point. We just were moving all the police sections into the new section that has all departments. And the thing we were trying to do was to get more consistency. Some departments weren't even created in ordinance at all, like the ITT department. It didn't even have there is now created a department of, right? Which is like the minimum that some others do. And there's nothing that says that we had to do that either, but it was a little confusing that some departments had it, some departments didn't. Economic development isn't created as anything, but it's referenced as a division in a few sections. There's a housing and community development department that's currently created that doesn't exist. So in that sense, there's a lot of just cleaning up so that at least we have one section with one sentence that it creates each department at least. And then the only thing we did was move the other paragraphs related to the departments that already had more substance. We didn't add additional substance.
Okay, that's helpful. And it's also simultaneously not helpful because then I look at like the community development department, and for me to like really understand if this formulation of a new or this reorg made sense, I just wanted more details about what's the goal or the objective of the community development department, like its mission of sorts. And it doesn't really say that other than it says what divisions would fall under it. However, here's another point, and this is on page 15, where we talk about community development department. It's creating a department that should include the following divisions. And so do we list the divisions that are actually currently departments as such? This is what was confusing me. It's like Office of Affordable Housing, that's what it's called now, but Planning and Land Use Department. I think you got rid of division because it's not a division yet. See, this is what's confusing me. Like what comes first?
Yeah, Councilor, Chairman Abeyta, Councilor Villarreal.
Just a
Am
little
I quiet?
Your voice is a little robotic. It's hard to hear.
Can you hear me now? Yep, okay. The sound hasn't reached back to me yet, though. So remind me what we're asking. What was the question?
Just the way that we're describing a new department, and we're talking about
Yes.
what divisions would be included in it, but they're not
Right.
official divisions yet. So I
Right,
think
so
you could describe.
oh. Am I still? Okay. For the substitute bill, basically what we did with the substitute is kept everyone with their same names, but they still might become a division. That way, for branding purposes, we don't have to change the fire department to the fire division on fire trucks. We don't have to change any shirts at the land use department, although it would be planning and land use. But so things that are called departments now would still be called departments despite being divisions, and things that are called offices would still be offices. The economic development division actually was already a division in code, so I just left it that way. And that helps also with all of our cross references, which actually there aren't too many. The primary cross reference issue is the planning and land use department. There's a lot of mentions of that department, but really the council is in charge of creating departments. And then beyond that, really, it's supposed to be an operations decision. So you create the departments, you can say what their purpose is, that kind of thing. It was a lot easier to keep track of because we have references to the Economic Development Division and the Office of Affordable Housing to just list out what divisions were in those two new departments. Whereas other departments like the Public Works Department, divisions are not defined anywhere in code because they're more operational management decisions. And the governing body is assigned specifically determining how many departments and what are they.
Thank you for that clarity. Well, shouldn't we have some more details about the community development department, like its purpose? All it's saying is that we're creating it and what divisions would be part of it, and then it pretty much ends. So in order for us to understand the, like you said, purpose, objective, shouldn't we have more details in there? It would help me to have a better understanding of, I just don't know how detailed, because some of these sections are very detailed and others aren't. So
Chairman Abeta, Councilor Villarreal, I would say most of them do not have purpose statements at this point, so it would be that would be a lot of policy to develop, which would be maybe separate than none of them are really defined for purpose right now. Most of them are just created, and then a few are heavily regulated, like police, fire, and land use.
okay. Okay, I'm gonna yield the floor because I need to find the rest of my notes in this system. So I'll yield the screen. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, questions from the committee?
Mr. Chair,
Counselor, did you want to see a brief slide presentation we had put together?
Yeah, let's do that. That's a good idea. And then we'll go back to questions. Thank you.
I don't think
Mayor.
it'll answer any of the really core questions, but it is at least an orienting, quick overview, and then we'll just go through it to make sure everybody has the same set material in front of them, and then get off the camera and let everybody ask their questions. But if the city attorney can, I believe you've got the slide deck at your fingertips, city attorney. So this is very much just a quick overview to make sure everybody has the same information as a point of departure for your discussion. The first slide is, the next slide after the cover slide is a quick picture of the current organization chart. If you can move to that one, Aaron.
Are you not seeing it?
No, we still have the first slide on the deck, of the deck.
Oh, hold on. That's
Are
weird.
you not able to move it?
I'm seeing I'm seeing the second slide, so let me see. Hold on. Well,
So we have the slides down the left-hand side. There.
right. Well, I went to slideshow, but it's not showing
you're
the
perfect. You've
slideshow
got-
to you. Okay.
You've got the existing org chart. So this is just a reminder of the current city organization chart that was in the budget book for fiscal year 20. It does not have, as the asterisk indicates, the Arts and Culture Department. So at the moment, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. According to this, there would be 13 individual one-off departments strung across a single line of.
Mr. Mayor, Counselor, Chairman, there's also the general government box, which actually includes multiple what we consider departments as well. So that's the Office of Affordable Housing, Office of Emergency Management, Environment, or sorry, Economic Development, and Constituent Council Services.
Right. So it's closer to 16 or 17, but you can see just visually what our current state of org chart looks like. It's worth keeping that in mind, that this is the point of departure. So the next slide is quickly just a reminder of what we were proposing. We were three efforts to use the language of community engagement, community development, and community health and safety. The other major change is to change Parks and Recreation from being a single freestanding entity to combine parts of it with things that it could be more like. And then there are two other elements that are not in the reorg per se, but are relevant to what is being done to respond to different issues. One is a grants management division in finance to centralize grant accounting, and that may come up later tonight when you look at the CAFR report, and safety staff in Office of Emergency Management. There's a third one, I believe, that came up in the budget hearings that had to do with where the public defender would sit, but it's also not in the reorg legislation. So the next one, the next slide simply reminds everybody what we're talking about with each of those individual changes. The community engagement city clerk would take the council and constituent services and the city clerk's office and make them a unified effort to do a kind of a front door through which residents and council members can walk to get information about all kinds of data requests, the minutes you went over so carefully tonight, the city's website, and a variety of other activities that are increasingly data-driven and information-rich. And since part of the thinking was that with the substantial amount of electoral work being relocated to the county, this was a timely effort to consolidate these activities. The next slide then talks about the elements of community development. You can see that affordable housing, arts and culture, economic development, planning and land use, and tourism would come under this heading. I think the question that was asked earlier about what's the mission or what's the theory of the case. I had a very long and very fruitful conversation with our land use director last week, and we talked about focusing on really the output, not of each of these entities individually, but as a team. So as an entity, you could say planning and land use does a lot of permit work, does a lot of inspection, takes on a lot of the issues involving land use cases, and that's true, but that's not really what we want from them any more than all we want from tourism is heads in beds, or economic development. All we care about is diversifying the economy, or arts and culture, implementing the Culture Connects document, or affordable housing, helping people and dealing with HUD. What we're really looking for is a unified effort to deliver livable neighborhoods, economic opportunity for our residents, a span of housing choices that is as diverse as possible, with as many different opportunities as possible, and a community where arts and culture is really embedded in the quality of life of all of our residents. And so the idea here is that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and that the individual outputs of each of these entities isn't really the purpose of each of them. The purpose is something much more, much larger, which is neighborhood livability, economic opportunity, housing choice, economic diversification, and more embedded arts and culture in the quality of life of everybody who lives here. The next slide looks at community health and safety. Again, it outlines the individual elements of this team. And again, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. If you look at what we're trying to deliver, it is a community where there is a much greater attention to the social indicators of well-being and of health, and also a criminal justice and safety entity that responds appropriately to the requests that are made by bringing these pieces together. So that's a quick reminder of each of the elements of these proposed reorganization components. And just wanted to make sure everybody had a equal point of departure for the elements of the proposal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Let's go to questions from the committee.
Mr. Chair.
Councilwoman Romero Worth.
So I guess I want to go back to page 15 and just make sure I'm understanding this starting on line 10, the Community Development Department. So this says there is created a department of city government to be known as the Community Development Department that shall include the following divisions. And then back to Councilor Villarreal's point, some of these things are called divisions and some of these things are called departments. Run that by me one more time.
Chairman Abeyta, Councilor Romero Worth. Basically, the divisions have their current names. They wouldn't change names.
Except Planning and Land Use Department.
I'm sorry, in terms of classification as a division or a department or an office.
Does that work?
Councilor Abeyta, it's more of a nomenclature than a taxonomy. So basically, it's the name of the department rather than how it would be, what level of the organization it would fall into. So they would be divisions because they're underneath the department, but they're called departments.
Except
or
when they're
divisions, yeah, or offices. Yep. Right now we have the same thing. We have the Office of Affordable Housing. We call it a department. We have the Division of Economic Development. We've been calling that a department.
Okay, so I'm just going to make sure we have no typos here then. So we have the Community Development Department that has the following divisions. They are the Economic Development Division, the Office of Affordable Housing, the Planning and Land Use Department, the Tourism Santa Fe Department, and the Arts and Culture Department. And those are all the right things, since we can't really tell whether they should be departments or divisions based on how they fall.
Chairman Abeyta, Councilor Romero Worth, that is the intentional wording. Whether or not it needs to be that way is a separate question. I think it really was a big debate on how to address the names of the various departments, particularly since The initial draft kept the fire department and the police department as departments because I couldn't imagine the city changing all their vehicles. That was the only reason. And they were the only ones that didn't change. I changed everyone else to division. It got really confusing. And so the updated version has everyone keeping their same name essentially. I guess planning and land use used to be planning and land use at some point, is my understanding. I was asked to change it back to, because at some point it may have included that. So at least we have one overarching principle now, which is that the current names stay the same. Before we were changing some and not changing others. So, but unfortunately the overarching principle still results in inconsistency.
Okay, on page 16, there is a list of things that are being repealed. And you mentioned earlier that we have no drafting manual that speaks to things like he means is gender neutral, even though we know it's not gender neutral. Do we anywhere, I mean, can you just say is repealed without saying what the section was about?
The ones that are repealed are listed in the caption as having been either moved or their departments that no longer existed. So the one that no longer exists is housing and community development. So that's one that's being repealed but not moved. The other ones are all just being moved into the new chapter that's all the departments in one place.
And it's just a drafting question, though. You don't have to say what it is. You don't have to give any other hint, you don't have to give a caption that you don't have to give the caption that goes with the section when you repeal it. You can just say the section name and repeal it.
Chairman Abeyta, Councilor Romero-Worth, there is no drafting manual on that issue. And it is part of the caption. And it's
I just want to point out something in the community engagement department. So that's where the Office of Constituent and Council Services will be. And I just want to point out that council services is really important. That is the staff, one FTE at the moment, to the council. And I just want to continue to make this differentiation between the executive and the legislative. And we are kind of a blend. And that staff is within city government and obviously has to be managed. But I just want to point out that I feel like it's probably okay to have the council's staff under the city clerk, because under the charter, the city clerk is, what are the words? Is appointed with the consent of the governing body. So we have a role in who that person is. And I just want to point out that I think that's important, since our staff is managed by that people, the staff that directly works for the counselors, which I see someday in better times expanding. And I just want to continue to draw these distinctions and be clear that, you know, the council is not under the mayor, is not under the executive. We are, you know, this is part of the balance of powers. And so I just point that out. I guess I also would like to go a little bit to some conversation around parks and parks being moved to public works, and just hear from whoever's appropriate about why that alignment makes sense.
Okay, who wants to take that on from staff?
Chairman Abeyta, Mayor Weber, I think we might have some folks from Parks, or do you want to address it?
Probably needs to be addressed at a high level, I would think.
You know, we are dealing with a school night for some of our people who would otherwise be here, including both the city manager and Christine, who are off doing parental duty to meet their teachers. I think Regina and John Romero are both here. I can tell you from my own experience, just quickly as an overview, that this is one of those categories where if you think about the overall reason for, one of the reasons for doing reorganizations, it is to eliminate gaps or cracks into which problems fall, or redundancies in which there is overlap but not a good job of dealing with a responsibility. And so I think either John or Regina could talk about something that is currently an issue in our community, which has to do with weeds, and under which conditions, which department, which organization, which entity is responsible for taking care of which weeds, and also who has which kinds of equipment. I mean, it really gets very quickly, it gets down to a serious operational matrix that exists in our city government to delineate issues that allow things to go on far too long and in a very inefficient manner, where a simple consolidation would resolve the ambiguity and deliver better service. So that's sort of a high level answer. I think either Regina or John could describe to you in a very specific way how this combination will lead to a better level of service for our residents, frankly, a better job opportunity for our employees, who will have the satisfaction of seeing their jobs well done and appreciated, and the equipment maintained and utilized more efficiently. I don't know whether John, you or Regina would rather speak up, but both of you have addressed this previously.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilor Romero Worth, and Chair Abita. So the first thing that I think makes a lot of sense is that I think there's a lot of similarities between what Public Works does and what Parks does, and that is maintaining city-owned infrastructure. And whether that infrastructure is a road, a piece of turf, a building, it's a lot of the same operational things, dealing with capital, maintenance of capital. It's a lot of coordination. There's a decision of when do you maintain capital and when do you reconstruct it. We have that synergy currently within the department between our streets division and our engineering division. The streets, our streets division maintains them to a certain point. After that, and that includes overlays, mill and overlay, repaving jobs. But then certain roads get to a point where they have to be reconstructed, and those type of efforts get handed off to engineering. That synergy would occur between parks and facilities. Right now, parks does the majority of the maintenance, not only watering and mowing, but they do basic irrigation maintenance, replacing sprinkler heads, winterizing, that type of thing, basic repair. But then there's a point in time where that, say that irrigation infrastructure needs to be reconstructed, and that's when it would get handed over to facilities. So having both those under the same department, that makes a lot of sense. I think there's a lot of areas where there's a lot of overlap and a lot of coordination that currently exists. The trails, Parks maintains, engineering division constructs them. There's a lot of different variations of open space. There's passive open space, there's watersheds, and there's different roles that streets has in that, when maintaining drainage ways, that Parks has in maintaining open space, and that stormwater has in maintaining the integrity of our watersheds. So there's a lot of overlap in that. Another thing, just more from a functional standpoint, we share a lot of the same area within the Seiler yard. Really, other than solid waste and fleet, pretty much that whole yard's taken up by Public Works and Parks. So there's a lot of coordinating equipment. My guys share a forklift. I know this gets down to the nuts and bolts, but there's really, it gets down to this, but a forklift with Parks. We use it to unload paint totes for our paint truck. Parks use it for their needs. So there's a lot of opportunity for sharing and resources. I know my signal guys help parks with hanging banners at downtown during events and things of that nature because we have bucket trucks. It helps because we use the bucket trucks for our signal repair on a daily basis. Whereas parks, it's very intermittent. So, it doesn't make sense to buy a bucket truck just for them to have for a couple of festivals. So we currently have a lot of this coordination because in the end, we all work for the city and we're all here to deliver, a good experience for the citizens of Santa Fe. But I think having them within our department just can help to improve that. Another thing that I think will help is Public Works is we help manage the capital budget, especially when selling general obligation bonds, GRT bonds. We're the group that coordinates that effort, and being able to make sure that parks needs are included in that, so that we don't ignore any of the parks needs. That's important in having in the Public Works Department. I think I can go on more examples of equipment that we continue to share, that we can start to share, that we don't currently share, efforts that may be redundant, that we can reorganize. And just in general, I think, it'll really help us to better define roles between all of our divisions. So that way we don't have 3 divisions doing the same thing, and we can really fine tune it to make sure, again, that we don't have parks out there repairing potholes on trails. We can maybe assign that to streets because we're the pothole guys. We're the streets is the asphalt guys. Whereas parks, it can free them up for more of their duties, which is dealing with veg management and that type of stuff. So that's all I have. I don't know if Regina has anything to add to that.
Thank you so much, John and Chairman and councilors. One thing I would also add that I noticed right away as we started having discussions about working together with the Parks team is we started looking at engineering solutions to solve operational issues. So, the breadth of resources and skills that we have in Public Works really comes to bear on every division. We all sit together as a leadership group every single week, talk about initiatives that the governing body has given direction about, that the senior leadership has given a direction about, and what the constituents need responses on. And it's really valuable to say, well, we keep struggling with this operational thing. Is there an engineering solution that can get us closer to it? Is there a capital investment that we need to make that could solve this problem more systemically for ourselves? And so that both that leadership team that's really strong with a range of skills to apply, whether it's Noel jumping in with, parking a staff, the whole Public Works staff supports the whole outcome of the department. And so it really does give a broad range of resources and skills to address issues and really get the parks providing services that we really want for the city.
So I guess my follow-up would be, so I get the synergies, if you will, around equipment and I don't know, types of work in maintaining our infrastructure. You can also, we're not going to lose environmental policy by making this move, is what I want to be assured of. I know you look specifically, Regina, you've done a lot of work in energy efficiency for the city. And, I want to make sure that we continue to be able to advance environmental policy through this department in terms of water conservation or, what our parks look like through an environmental lens. And that we're not losing that by moving this department with you.
I think that's another synergy that we didn't talk a lot about, and that's the stormwater one. John mentioned it. And we had really considered how close those are because stormwater is even looking at some things through the stormwater management plan of capturing infiltration of rainwater to a shallow basin. And then how could we use that to actually irrigate our parks? And so, Melissa McDonald has a great background in landscape architecture, and she's really interested in the water cycle. And so we're very interested in what we can do to increase the sustainability of our parks, especially from a water perspective, but also from others, from an operational perspective, of course, from the chemicals. In all of our divisions of Public Works, we're highly regulated. We're probably next to the utility department, the most highly regulated department there is, right? John's got so many regulations that we make sure that everything we do complies with them. And so I think we would make great leaps forward actually in sustainability in our parks by joining with Public Works.
Okay, I just want to make sure, given that we'll be dealing with climate change, we need to be preparing for climate change, that we're not doing anything to hinder the progress that needs to be made as we look at realigning parks over here in kind of the I don't know, the infrastructure side of things. And obviously there are a lot of things that can be done with regard to environment and energy efficiency and environmental policy, but I just wanted to hear that directly from the people who will be operating this.
If I can, Chair, Councilor Romero Worth. So that's definitely something that, we could say yes, of course, to. And further, I really think it's something that Public Works is already dealing with. Those type of measures would be handled through the design and reconstruction of facilities, of parks facilities, which we handle through our facilities division. So, we would continue to work in that effort. But then it'll also help to have parks with the Public Works team, because we can coordinate how maintenance of this revised infrastructure will work. Because I think that's primarily how it'll affect parks, is how they maintain the newer initiatives that we implement. But yes, definitely, it's something that we definitely look forward to accomplishing.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all the questions I have for the moment. I'll yield for other members.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess keeping on going with parks and how some of these changes and might impact needs at the parks. So looking at park infrastructure, we have some real big needs with our parks. I don't believe that we have a single park in the city that has shade over the play area. We have parks that are out of compliance with the equipment being too old. We are not meeting kind of best recommendations on some of our flooring with park. I don't believe we have a single park that is ADA accessible in terms of, I'm not sure if you're familiar with they're often called miracle parks, but parks that are for children that may have some type of developmental difference. So I was curious to hear how Public Works is going to be able to handle some of these park infrastructure challenges.
Chair Abeyta, Councilor Sanchez. So again, under the current structure, with parks not being in Public Works would manage those efforts. Those would all be handled through reconstruction projects handled by our facilities division. I think just going forward, another thing within Public Works, under my engineering division, we do have an ADA coordinator who acts basically as our ADA guru, and it's coordination between him and our facilities folks. Again, and as well as our parks folks, just to make sure that whatever infrastructure that's not complete hardscape, but that needs to be maintained to maintain the integrity of that accessibility. And other things like that, I think is important. But again, a lot of those initiatives would be managed by Public Works as it stands.
Well, that's good to know. So thank you for that. I'm so sorry, just lost my train of thought. It had to do with parks. I'll find it again, but let's circle back to just the general. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you talk a little bit about, if we do approve this reorg and Parks does come over to you, how is that? Have you guys talked about a transition plan? Right now we are in the height of our weed season. So this is, it's a little bit of a challenging time to make a big transition in terms of that weed management. Can I hear a little bit about how that transition would go and not having disruption of services? I'm already getting a number of calls from constituents who are saying that it's been a long time since their streets and medians have been cleared on their streets, and that the parks are, overgrown. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about the transition time and how we would manage that effectively, so we don't have disruption of service.
Thank you, Chair Abita, Councilor Sanchez. So, our intent with, if parks were to come over to Public Works, is to bring it under their current structure so that, at least for the time being, there's not going to be any substantial change to their operation. They're going to still have the same management structure. It's just, the only thing is the ultimate report will be to the Public Works Department Director. Levels of service wouldn't be reduced anymore from what they are at this point. But that being said, I've already been in discussion with some of the park staff just to come up with ways that we can maybe improve on it, at least for the remainder of this season. Some small things, keeping a priority plan in place to where we don't jump from our day-to-day routine just to go hit, a specific honeydew that's not an immediate safety need. We just see where it falls in our priority plan and just stay to that list. So we do one park, then go to the next, whatever. And then use this off season, the winter, to see how maybe we can look at trying to get even more out of the limited staff that Parks has, but look at some capital improvements that can be done to help reduce the amount of maintenance required by certain things. For instance, medians. What kind of median improvement projects would happen? A lot of times the median improvement projects, we definitely, engineering division manages those. We follow Parks lead as far as what they want, but we manage the project as far as the procurement, the hiring of contractors, all that stuff, because we have those project managers. So we would help with those efforts, but working with them to see what can we do to make some of this infrastructure a little less maintenance intensive. So that's my medium range plans, meaning like hopefully by next fiscal year. But right now we're just going to try to stick to our guns, make a priority plan, and just stick to it instead of just jumping all over the city, which becomes very inefficient, and just come up with a reasonable prioritization plan and try to stick to it as best as possible.
If I could just interject one word, I think John's point about continuity is a good one, and I would put in a good word for the so-called SWAT team that's been working on the medians, a group of residents who were really instrumental in coming up with a series of design suggestions, and they are very proud of what they've contributed, and quite rightfully. They've been great advisors and friends, and they would continue under any situation, reorg or no reorg. Their advice and input and knowledge is very instrumental. And so we don't want anybody to feel like their input or their contributions are undermined or undervalued by virtue of talking about a reorganization. Their effort is tremendous and greatly appreciated, and will continue whether the reorganization happens or not. We really want to give them a very strong thank you and an endorsement for their help.
Thank you for that addition, Mr. Mayor. It actually brings up another one of the questions that I had. I know that there's a number of different groups that John Munoz has been working on in relation to parks. So I know very recently he connected one of my constituents who expressed interest with, I don't know if there was something about pollinators, it had to do with the health of our vegetation and the diversity of it. And I think that those are really important focuses that I want to make sure are not lost. And also those opportunity for, community engagement in these areas and some of these, like the SWAT group and like this, I believe that they're I'd have to ask, but I know that there's a focus on, pollination and making sure that our medians are supporting the local pollinators that are so crucial to our ecosystem. How are those going to be impacted by that change? Is this something that you guys will be taking on in Public Works?
Chair, Councilor Sanchez, those are definitely things that will be taken into consideration. things that we have to consider, is that, as well as what kind of infrastructure we can adequately maintain. And just with whatever staffing we have, and then coming up with numbers for what staffing we may need to manage some of those efforts. Definitely, we have a lot of knowledge in the Parks Division as it stands, and that knowledge is going to be retained because they're still coming over. At least at a department level, I think I can speak for Regina as well, is we're going to rely heavily on their expertise, just like we rely on a lot of our division directors' expertise. I rely on Transit's expertise, on managing bus routes and schedules. I rely on airport's expertise regarding how to run an airport. And so that won't be lost, especially with my management style. We work with from our division directors all the way down to frontline employees. It's every employee that really helps work a group. It's not, the head helps make everything move in a direction, but I rely on all my employees and all their expertise. I'm not an expert in signal maintenance. You try to get me to maintain a signal, I can maybe time it, but I can't maintain it. I have guys to do that. And I think as long as we have those guys, and just like everyone else, I would continue to rely on their expertise and definitely not try to second guess that expertise by any means.
No, thank you, John. I do really appreciate that sentiment about, the value that the parks teams do hold in their collective knowledge and expertise. But back to kind of these citizen groups, it's definitely something that as we discuss this over the next week, I would like to make sure that we are kind of checking all those boxes so we know what is being housed there. What are some of these almost side projects, quote unquote, that are happening, and making sure that they are not lost in the shuffle. So I know that I'll get another bite at this in 2 days at Quality of Life, and then we'll see this again at City Council. So I'd like to make sure that we are, have that conversation with John Munoz. What are all these other pieces that are there that maybe aren't necessarily written on paper? And I'd like to see a plan for how we are going to be moving forward and addressing these. We know that there might be some citizen committees that exist on paper and don't really exist in action. And so I think that we, as you guys are looking at what you're taking on here, I'd like to see those and have a plan for them as well. Go ahead.
Yes, Councilwoman Romero Worth.
So one of those, so speaking of pollinators, one of those groups is also the tree board. Is the tree board moving over to parks? With parks to public works. So those are the kinds of things I think Councilor Cassett Sanchez is absolutely right. And I don't want to lose, again, those things that are critical to the environmental aspects of our parks. So thank you.
Councilwoman Sanchez, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So following up on what Councilor Villarreal was mentioning with not really having a mission statement for some of these new departments as they're developed, I think that that is something, I know that we had them in our budget hearings. So I think they were, these small statements, but I think that throughout this conversation, it'll be important to pull them out. And one thing that I've really been struggling with is, we're talking a lot about kind of new efficiencies and working towards a common shared goal, but how are we going to know that we've hit the mark? How are we going to know that through this reorganization, we are meeting those new shared goals? And so I think that it'll be really important throughout the next week to have I'd eventually like to see that written out, even if the correct place is not necessarily in the ordinance. I think that it's important for us to have those stated and discussing, how are we going to know that this has been successful and that, these reorgs going to happen? And that being said, I want to give the caveat that I understand that things like this also take time to really mesh. So I don't think that in 3 months, we're going to be like, yes, hit those goals. And we know, it's going to take a couple years, especially in our current environment where we're not able to move forward the way that we would like to. But I think that it's important that us as counselors really have a good idea of, when we're looking at this reorg, to know that if we do move forward with it, if it has been successful in reaching what it is that we're hoping that we're going to be doing. So I think spelling out those missions more, and talking about maybe what this might look like and how we know that we're in the right track is going to be really important for us. I don't know if that's already been discussed, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure if you have the opportunity. I know that Jarell's not here at the moment, and so this might be a question better put to her when I get an opportunity to speak with her. But if you have thoughts on that, I'd love to hear that.
Sure. It's a good question, and it's a very worthwhile exercise. And in fact, we've already had, led by Jarell and others in the administration, several meetings of the teams that would conceivably be combined under this reorganization. And one of the requests that was made and is a work in progress is to take each of their statements and try to do some sort of a combined effort to see if when you bring them together, what language emerges that describes what the shared purpose is. And to some extent, that's what I was trying to describe when I talked about the whole being greater than the sum of the parts. That, the purpose of a land use and planning department is not just to issue permits. That's an output, but that's not a purpose. The purpose is much more elemental to the well-being and livability of our neighborhoods. And so same with a housing program. The purpose of a housing program is not just to build more houses. It's to create neighborhoods where people want to live. And so I think the effort is ongoing to create a kind of a meshed statement for these entities, these new teams. I can't tell you that I've seen a finished product yet, but folks in each of these areas have already been thinking along the same lines that you're suggesting, that there needs to be an expression, there needs to be language, and there needs to be vision, and there needs to be aspiration behind it, so that it is more than a mechanical exercise.
I think that it would be really helpful to hear some of that as we move forward with these discussions, over the next week and a half. I know I would really appreciate it. I think I would really like to hear from the directors who are I know that we are setting up a system that should not be dependent on the actual individuals who are in there, but we also can't separate it from the fact that these are the individuals that are going to be driving the beginning of this. And so I think it would be really useful to hear some of this. It's one of my concerns is making sure that we're finding the balance between departments coming together as a bigger department, apparently that's our language, and that they are moving towards this common goal, but there are still going to be pieces that each division department, the language is tough, that each of them will still have to be doing, and making sure that those missions are also not compromised. I especially worry about it with community health and safety, which, I've expressed a lot of support for the development of community health and safety. I think that there's a lot of really good things that we can move forward with that, but given the current climate, I do get concerned about community services getting lost in the shuffle. And so again, those are some of those things that I want to make sure that we have places that we can be checking in on this to make sure that we're still on the correct path that we are intending to be on.
Well, I think that's exactly right. And it was part of what John Romero and Regina were talking about earlier, about the people who are running a particular specific area maintain subject matter expertise. And that has to be respected. In fact, it is the whole reason why they have those positions in the first place. And we want the subject matter expertise to be respected and enhanced. And we also want it to blend with the other elements, the other individuals in those new teams, so that they can, we heard about pollinators. These people we want them to cross-pollinate. As a small footnote to reorganizational history, for those of you who are fans of American business history, the creation of General Motors under Sloan, the whole theory of uniting all of these different brands that became General Motors in the first place was something that he called centralized decentralization. And it's exactly what you're describing, Councillor Cassett Sanchez, where there is centralization of certain things in order to get coordination and synergy, but the instrumentality of the different elements and their ability to deliver what they are uniquely able to do with their expertise is respected by the operation.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. That definitely hits my concerns right on the head. That's what I'm looking for. The last thing that I would request to get added to this packet, and then I'll yield the floor for now, is a detailed proposed org chart. I think that would just help me visually to be looking at not just everything in these pieces, but if we can, I know that we've had it before, so if we can just add that to the packet materials, that would be really handy as we're having this discussion. And I'll go ahead and yield the floor for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, staff, and to John and Regina for your explanations of where you see synergy. I mean, I think it's helpful, and simultaneously just thinking about like shared equipment and where procurement and management of projects could be like interconnected better. I think all of that actually could occur without any reorg pieces. So I guess I'm still struggling with some of the aspects of these reorgs and the variety and the amount of them. I mean, if we were looking at one at a time, I think sometimes I'd feel better about trying to dissect one piece and looking at that and not doing it all at once, because these are big changes. And some of me is a skeptic on it, only because I see a very challenging time that our staff is going through. We're not only still transitioning and implementing aspects of a new system through ERP, but we're still in furloughs till September. We have a hiring freeze, so there's positions that will not be filled that actually there's positions that we really need. And so it puts more strain on our staff to try to figure out how to cover these areas without those positions filled. So I think about that and what our staff is going through during this time, and then to add another layer of a reorg and trying to figure out where they fit into this sounds stressful. And also simultaneously, it's like, do we really want to do this at this time? Because we're in the pandemic and we're kind of in, I feel like we sometimes are in reactionary mode because of what we're having to work with, what adaptations our staff has to go through. So that's why I struggle with this, like a large amount of a lot of different changes. And part of me is also thinking about, well, what this also adds to less direct hire or less direct reports to our city manager. And in the past, we had talked about how a deputy city manager would be helpful, and most cities our size actually have that. So part of me wants to say, well, why don't we consider that? Because there's this external and internal needs that a city manager has to hold and balance. And I think we've always talked about how it would be helpful to have another person to be able to share that responsibility, just like other cities do. And so part of me thinks that that's might be one of the solutions that we are missing versus trying to reorg these and create new departments right now. So I guess my concern is still about the silos. I know in the caption it says eliminating silos, but part of me sees on paper, for instance, the Community Health and Safety Department. That on paper sounds good to me, but then I think about like how they all work together, and part of those connections are already happening and they need to happen more. I just don't know if creating another director to oversee all of those very important departments within that proposed reorg is going to function the way we want it to. And I don't know, I'm struggling with all of these mostly because of the situation that we're in with our staff, and also knowing that there's things that need to change and communication needs to improve. But just seeing some of you talk about it now and realizing where the inefficiencies are, it makes me feel like we could do it without a reorg. So I'm still, I guess I feel like we're biting off more than we can chew right now. And so I still want to do some research and get some questions answered in the next iteration when we hear this on Wednesday again. So right now I think I'm going to abstain just because there's still some unanswered questions and ends that feel like they're not really being tied off very tightly, and they're a little bit frayed still. So I think I won't be voting tonight for this. I just still, there's a lot of questions I'm still trying to figure out. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilwoman Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the comments of all the other counselors very much. The only, change is really hard for people. I mean, a lot of you have heard me say, nothing changes if nothing changes. So that's what we're trying to do. It doesn't mean that it'll be easy. And I think that handling people gently is a big part of this. I've watched for the last couple of years, and I really have to compliment Mr. Munoz and the way that he has developed a relationship with the park staff. It wasn't a staff that really many of us knew very well previously. And he's really turned them into a team, and they work as a team. They're a very highly functioning group of men and women at this point in time, and the way that he's also brought some of the managers along. If we pass this, I think that it's really important as leaders and managers to continue to allow different groups of people to still be teams, and to know that they can depend on us and that they can depend on their managers to really and truly care about them. Because I've seen Mr. Munoz, be a real master at that. And it's valuable to us. It's valuable to us as an organization, and it's extremely valuable to us as a city. So I just ask that everybody would keep that in mind, that not everybody loves this change, but it's really incumbent upon us, if we make this change, to help others see how it's for the betterment of the city, and that we respect the teams that have been built and all the individuals that are on those teams. So, you know, I'm not talking about, you know, I don't have questions about the real specifics. I'm just concerned about how we keep people together as teams and continue to let them know that we value them and that we care about them. So that's all I have, Chair.
Chairman, can I build on
go
what Councilor Lindell just said?
Yes, go ahead.
I think we are, and also on what Councilman Villarreal brought up about the moment we're in right now and the changes that are going on around us in the country and in the world. I think this is exactly what Councilor Lindell described. I think we have a moment in not just our city's history, but the country's history where the folks are looking for two things. One is vision and the other is empathy. And one without the other is not the right mix. Vision that doesn't take into consideration people, their lives, their concerns, their aspirations, their fears. Vision like that is cold. Empathy without vision leads to a great sense of concern, but no forward motion. And so I'm hopeful, and I believe that in this proposal and with the people that we have on this call, and some who would be on this call if they could, we have a really remarkable team, to borrow what Councilor Lindell said, a team at every level, at every part of the city, who are able to combine vision and empathy. And for me, that is the right combination for this particular moment that we're in. And we need to be mindful of both so that we are both empathetic to people and visionary about where we can make positive change happen.
Thank you, Mayor. Comments that
Did you just quote Biden? Oh, sorry, what you just said, it sounded like something Biden just said.
Really? No, I haven't heard the vice president speak. So, although I'm looking forward to it, but no, I haven't heard the vice president speak. I know his slogan is Build Back Better, which I also embrace. I think coming out of this, we need to build back better. And that is, again, leveraging our assets to do things better and do better things. So I am, maybe I'm just channeling the vice president.
Comments that I have regarding the reorg. When I looked at this, one thing that I did is I researched, like Councilwoman Villarreal said, other cities. She alluded to other cities our size and their structure. And she's right in that they have a deputy manager, but they actually have two deputy managers. And they organize their departments underneath the deputy managers. And that's the city of Las Cruces. They've got an assistant city manager under operations that community development, parks and rec, public works, quality of life, and utilities reports to. They've got an assistant city manager that economic development, financial services, human resources, and ITT reports directly to. Rio Rancho has, they call them deputy city managers, but one deputy city manager, the city clerk, utilities, public works, parks and rec, community services, convention and visitors reports directly to that deputy. The other deputy manager has police, human resources, financial services, fire, IT, and library services. I went outside of the state, I looked at Boulder, and Boulder has two deputy city managers also. So I don't think one would be enough because when you count the numbers of departments they have and the numbers of departments we have, they're pretty much the same. They range between 13 and 14, and to help their manager, they have the two deputies. And I don't, so I think if we don't do this kind of consolidation, then I think we would need to look towards two deputy managers. But the problem with that then is you're adding another layer of management, and then you're then I think you're becoming more top heavy. And that's one of the criticisms that I heard about maybe this reorg, was that we were becoming more top heavy. This actually, you're becoming less because you have less departments rather than more. So I think that's something that we would need to take a close look at, because one wouldn't be enough. As far as one of the departments, we've heard a lot about defunding the police, and people want that now. And I don't see how we do that without combining them with fire and with community services, so that we make sure that, like the example we were giving, instead of sending police officers to every call, we can send maybe social workers or other types of employees, but there would be that coordination between all of those key divisions or departments to make sure that we're addressing public safety the way the public wants us to. I understand the concern or the issue regarding the right time, whether or not this is the right time. I think maybe it is. The fact that we have a hiring freeze, by doing this, we may discover, because we brought so many people together, maybe we don't need as many positions. And so we find ourselves not filling some of these positions that have been frozen, because we have created these efficiencies by bringing groups together. So it might be a right time. It may also be a right time in that, since we have so many frozen positions, we're actually impacting less employees by doing this now rather than waiting till all of our employees come back. And then, like Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez said, something like this takes a year, 2, maybe even 3 years for it to really come to fruition. And so it's better that we start now rather than waiting. I just think this is going to take time. I think there's plenty of opportunities to check in, whether it be at mid-year or at budget. Or maybe that becomes maybe we do that check in every 6 months at mid-year and at budget as we move forward. And plus, just because we put something together now doesn't mean that we can't tweak it as we do those check-ins. Maybe there is a division or a section that isn't working. We discover why, and then we make the adjustment. So I'm going to support the reorg at this time, because I just don't think there'll ever be a good time. I mean, during budget, we heard, why are we doing this now when we're trying to do the budget? But when we had talked about this a few years ago, it's like, why are we talking about this now? Shouldn't we wait for budget? And so it's kind of like, well, when do we actually do it? And so I think it's something that we should try. And again, I don't think it's anything that we can't change if we find the need to. But I really thought, like the rest of the members of the committee, that hearing from staff was very helpful also. And like Mr. Romero talked about capital improvements, it makes sense that Public Works takes on more of our capital improvements, as to right now where you have parks maybe trying to take on those tasks and maybe not being as good as it, because they don't do it as often as Public Works. And so I think, yeah, there's still a lot of questions to be answered, but I think if we don't take that step now, I don't think we will. I think we will always continue to find reasons or excuses not to. One thing Councillor Lindell and I talked about early on, and I'm talking about 2 years ago, and maybe Councillor Lindell, I don't know if she's still on, but she had a list of all the city managers we've gone through over the past 15 years. And I don't know if she has that information off the top of her head or not, but I think we average a city manager every 2 years. And I think part of the problem is the span of control or the responsibility we put on that one individual, not only dealing with a governing body of 9, but in this case, right now, departments and divisions, direct reports anywhere between 16 and 17. And so I think that I think we should try this. And I think it is something, I think we could address more problems than it would create at this time. So those are my comments. Councilwoman Romero Worth, you had your hand back up.
Move to approve this item, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second,
Okay, second. Any further discussion? Can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signey Lindell,
yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Abstain.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes, willing to move this forward, but I want some of those questions addressed before final vote. So yes.
okay, thank you. Counselor Romana Beta,
Yes.
okay.
Okay, so that takes care of item C. I don't believe we pulled D, right? Okay, so then we are on to our presentation, which is the FY19 CAFR. Ms. McCoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have two individuals from our staff joining us, one individual from our staff joining us today, Deborah Harris Garmendia, and then a representative from Clifton Larson Allen, Ryan Jones, as well for this presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and share a PowerPoint with you to review our FY19 CAFR. So today we will reserve time for questions as well, but wanted to review with you a timeline over the past, reviewing the progress over the past few years. In addition to that, we will be reviewing some of the challenges we had with the FY19 CAFR, as well as our accounting division staffing levels, as well as a brief highlight over one of our main activities for account reconciliations to highlight the level of detail and time-consuming nature of these activities. And then we'll turn it over to Ryan Jones from CLA for the presentation from our independent auditor. Again, here you have the timeline that reviews the last few years and the progress the city has made. If we recall, next month will be 3 years since the McCard report was published, which I did identify several weaknesses and deficiencies in the city's financial system, reporting, internal controls. Right after the report was released, Council did weigh in to adopt the state procurement code in January of 2018. This was significant. By adopting the state procurement code, we were able to adopt state laws to use, as one of the findings in the McCard report indicated. That was an essential corrective action. Similarly, in the summer of 2018, there was a lot of action taken and a lot of work being conducted. The administration gave weekly updates to Council on the corrective action measures from the McCard report. The FY17 CAFR was late, and it was completed the summer of 2018. It was a qualified opinion that year. The single audit for the federal grants was unmodified that year. That summer, we did begin the FY18 year-end close process. The fall of 2018, we were able to issue a GRT bond, and the city was rated a AA+. In December of 2018, the CAFR was, FY18 CAFR was completed on time with an unmodified opinion, and both on the financials as well as the single audit. Spring of 2019, we did issue a green bond, and the wastewater system was independently rated a AA+. Fast forward to the summer of 2020, the finance department reorganization created a structure an organizational structure to separate duties. Again, this is one of the, as a follow-up to the McCard report. So we have a separate payroll division from Treasury that's separated from accounting, that's separated from procurement, and so on and so forth. The FY19 year-end close process was started in the summer of 2019. The fall of 2019, we actually notified council that the FY19 CAFR would be late due to a more detailed review. So we did not submit the CAFR by December of 2019. In January of 2020, council did adopt the city's procurement manual, again, to have written rules about process and procedure as a follow-up to the state procurement code. Then since the fall of 2019, we have been working to complete the FY19 CAFR. We projected that it would be completed in the summer of 2020. And we did have an unmodified opinion on the financials, and then a qualified opinion on the single audit that our auditor will review with you shortly. Did also want to mention that we had 5 findings that were cleared up from FY18 to FY19. Moving forward into some of the challenges that we had with the FY19 CAFR, as you recall from several of the last audits, and as Ryan will review with you, one of the major material weaknesses revolves around internal controls. So wanted to remind the council that we were still working in the E1 accounting system in FY19, which really did require manual processes, manual journal entries, paper as the source files, and paper journal entries, which really required our staff to do a lot of paper chasing for FY18 as well as FY19, for prior years. When our controller, Deborah Harris Garmendia, began with the organization in the summer of 2018, she did start to require that all journal entries were scanned into the shared drive in electronic form and duplicated in paper, and that there was electronic backup for our reconciliations as well. So this was a huge step forward, just to be able to have an electronic copy of the records in the financial system. Just again, wanted to remind you that our city staff has been working remotely on this audit, and we have also had staff working at on site to perform, along with CLA, the audit work. We have also been approved by council in prior years, as well as in FY21, to contract with CPAs to assist the staff with our closed procedures, as well as our audit prep. So it's a mix of our own staff as well as contractor staff that helps us in the year-end close process, as well as with the audit preparation. Again, just a review for our staffing changes. There were several staffing changes after the McCard report. In total, 7 of the 8 existing employees left the accounting division during fiscal year 19. Our accounting division was able to retain 1 employee, and we did gain 5 new employees in FY19 and through FY20. Also we've briefed the council on this before. One of those individuals was the controller, and when the treasury officer left last fall, I did ask the controller to assume the treasury officer responsibilities in an acting capacity. This was one of the positions that was in the process of being advertised publicly for a competitive process when COVID hit, and then we were subject to the hiring freeze. So, and then there was another position that because of a retirement in accounts payable, one of our accounting division staff has been filling in AP as she was trained initially in her career in AP, and has been a great assistance throughout the last year in those activities. So really have been understaffed in the accounting division as we've managed through these audits. Currently, we do have 2 vacant positions in the accounting division. Also wanted to review, that what our staffing levels are for budget of now at just over 300 million, what we had prior to the McCard report versus what we currently have, in addition to having, fewer staff and staff that is willing to assist in other divisions and in other areas. We are maintaining 2 of those positions vacant. Right now, we currently have 1 staff and have had 1 staff dedicated to grant accounting over the last year. And then as of the spring, staff has also been furloughed to 36 hours per week. So again, working with limited resources, staffing wise, number of hours that staff is able to work. So we've talked a lot about how change is difficult with the reorg conversation that you all just had. I wanted Deborah to walk you through the account reconciliation process, what it entails. That way you understand some of the changes that have been made over the last few years, some of the best practices that our team is implementing in the city. And again, just really with that in mind, that there's been a lot of change and changes, very difficult, especially when you're working with this level of detail. So what we've done in this next slide, and Deborah will walk you through this, is created a few definitions. So we're all in the same plane field. More than willing to answer any questions as to what these definitions mean. And then Deborah's broken out the reconciliation process really into 4 main steps to help the council understand the level, again, how time consuming this process is and the level of detail and staff time that this takes. So now I'll turn it over to Deborah to review.
Hi, Mr. Chair, councilors. To do a reconciliation, there's many steps to it. One of the first steps is your subledger. This is your record of all of your detailed account activity, your ins and out. If we are talking about accounts receivable, it's all of your billings coming in, and it's also all of the payments that your customers are sending in to you. It's any adjustments that you're making to their accounts, and it's truly a history of their activity. The next system that we look at when we do a reconciliation is the general ledger. The general ledger is the book of all of our accounts. So when we are looking at the difference between a subledger and a general ledger, you can think of your subledger having 100 activities per account, and it's going to total 500,000. When you're looking at your general ledger, the subledger communicates to the general ledger in totals. So it's going to be bringing over totals, not all of the activity. So the general ledger is going to say 500,000 in summary total, and your subledger is going to give you all your detail. So to do a reconciliation, a staff sits down and they look at the 2 systems. Both systems should total each other. There should be no variance in the balances. It should equal out. When there is not a balance between the 2, then they need to start doing research to figure out what has brought it out of balance. Either there is something in the subledger that has not been communicated over to the general ledger, and if that is the case, then they fix the general ledger with adjusting journal entries. During all of this, they're constantly keeping in mind if there is transactions that are in transit, is there timing differences, is there document source differences. And so there is a lot of different things that your trained staff is looking at. Once they have researched what the differences are, they've done all of the adjusting journal entries, they then true up the 2 systems and they now balance. The final step for month-end close and also year-end close that goes to the auditors is to create a professional packet. And what the professional packet is that you start from a summary aspect and you drill down to more detail. Think of it as a story that you're just unfolding as you flip the pages. So you have a summary reconciliation on top. The second page is a more detailed reconciliation. It's giving a little bit more information. The third is your detailed Excel spreadsheets where you're actually working the numbers. The fourth is any type of outside source documents that you may need if you're working on a bank reconciliation or you're doing a reconciliation to a vendor account. And then the last part is your general ledger that should show what it looks like on the GL side. And page 4 also could be your subledger. So you're giving all of the different details throughout it. And when it's handed over to the auditors, it is telling a story. They can pick it up, they can look at it, they can see exactly how you did it, and it should be self-explanatory and easy to read. Next slide, please. This is I've been doing daily and weekly trainings throughout our prep for year-end close. One of the things that I did for this year is I gave examples. So the staff knows what I am trying to convey to them. One of the critiques that we have from the auditors is that we do not have a consistency in submitting work. And so that I have given examples here of how, if they are doing a summary AR aging, the calculation on the right is what I would like them to also do. And I have given them how-to instructions on how to do a known collectability analysis so that we can give it to the auditors. On the left-hand side is a simple summary page of what I would like the front part of a reconciliation to be. So when it is handed over to the auditors at a glance, they can see all of the parts that are part of this reconciliation, and that it does zero out to a zero variance. Next slide, please. I think you've gone back. So part of the challenges of reconciliations, and we did come across it in year-end close for FY19, are these 3 areas. One of the things for reconciliations is it's very, very time consuming, especially depending on what account you are trying to reconcile. It's very tedious. You're going through all of the different transactions, and you are comparing 2 systems together. Depending on, as I said, what account you are reconciling, the systems that you are comparing to, sometimes these reconciliations can take weeks. That is based on the volume of data that is in it, the ease of research and locating the source documents, whether or not the reconciliations were performed consistently and frequently. This is the best scenario. If the more consistent and frequent you do a reconciliation, the easier it is to do because you have a learning curve. If you don't do reconciliations on a consistent and frequent basis, you are truly relearning it over and over again. So it does slow down the process. And also the date of the last reconciliation. The staffing is also something that's very important. I will say the city has a challenge in this right now, is that we do not have citywide, but also in accounting, because we are understaffed, we do not have adequate staff to perform all of the processes that truly is required for a smooth running accounting system and accounting process. And that also includes reconciliations. You need not only an adequate number of staff to do all of this work, but you need the proper staff. You need the staff that knows how to reconcile and how to do research. This is something that can be taught, but this is a specialized skill and not everyone has this skill set. It is also important to understand that sometimes in the city and in an organization, the importance of doing a reconciliation and especially turning it in a timely basis and on time to meet a deadline trying to convey the importance of these aspects is challenging. People don't understand why it's a important part of your accounting function, and it can be hard to communicate that. One of the important aspects of reconciliations is your documentation. If you do not have good historical and current documentation, you don't have the existence of it, you can't find it, or if you do find it, it is not complete. Doing a reconciliation, proofing out the numbers, making sure that what is still on the account is valid becomes extremely challenging and almost impossible. This is a challenge that we had during FY19. All three of these items on this page was a very big challenge for the city due to, in part, the turnover citywide, not just in accounting. Other departments have had citywide turnover, new staff coming in, learning their positions. And part of the learning process is learning, where do they gather information? Where are the source documents? If they're trying to double check one aspect of a reconciliation, what is a separate source that will verify what they are doing? All of that is a learning curve, and across the board, the city has had challenges in this learning curve because there's a lot of people leaving and a lot of people coming in.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you for reviewing that information with the committee. As again, we're trying to provide context and more information for the committee. Part of that, before we jump into the findings, which I'm going to ask Ryan Jones at this time to highlight. If Ryan is on the call, yes, he is. Thank you.
Hi, yeah, I'm sorry. Can everybody hear me? I'm having some internet problems.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Well, my name is Ryan Jones. I was the director on the 2019 audit. So we spent a lot of time out in Santa Fe. I spent a lot of time out in Santa Fe, you know, from about April through June, getting this audit done. And so what I'm here to do today is to present you with the results of our audit. So Mary, can you go to the next slide? Okay, so when we're engaged to do an audit, what we do is we do test work to develop an opinion. We look at the numbers that are provided to us. We look at the supporting documentation. We get comfortable with those numbers. And then we are able to issue an audit opinion. And so I'm happy to say that the audit opinion over the basic financial statements, meaning the numbers, the disclosures, that was a clean opinion. It is important to point out that it doesn't necessarily cover everything in the statements. We do perform limited procedures on the MD&A. We don't express an opinion on the official roster, a lot of the RSI, and then the introductory and statistical sections. Those are all management's responsibility. And we give in relation to opinion on the additional information in the CAFR. So we do perform some work on some of the supplementary information, but we don't dig into it like we do the the formal numbers in the audit procedures. Anytime we're auditing a local government that receives federal funding, we have to determine if a single audit needs to be performed. In this case, we did audit 2 programs, and it's our responsibility to issue an opinion over the city's compliance with the requirements of those programs. This is where we do not have a clean opinion. We had to modify our opinion for certain matters and certain material non-compliance that we came across in our procedures. That modified opinion is for the CDBG entitlement grants cluster. We modified that opinion for non-compliance in reporting, program income, and some special tests and provisions. And then also with the airport improvement program, it was the reporting requirement non-compliance that caused us to modify our opinion for that particular program and that particular reporting requirement. Mary, do you want to go to the next page? All right, just wanted to summarize some information for you all as a committee. During our audit, we posted 25 journal entries. So that's the numbers changing from when we first received them from management. And we adjust those numbers to get to a number that we're comfortable on. And so there were a lot of journal entries posted. Those needed to be posted really to get us to that clean opinion, where we're saying that, you know, to the best of our knowledge, based on our procedures, the numbers in the financial statements are accurate representations of balances and activity during the year. For the findings are classified into two different sections really in the back of the CAFR. We have your sort of basic financial statement findings, and then you have your federal compliance findings. So did want to tell you real quick, just to give you some context, what these types of findings are. So a material weakness, it's a deficiency in internal control that, if not remedied, would likely result in a material misstatement. So had we not come in and done the audit and identified some of these, the financial statements that would have been presented to you, to the public, it wouldn't have been accurate. There would have been material misstatements in there. Significant deficiencies is sort of the middle ground. Those deficiencies don't rise to the level of a material weakness, but they are important enough for us to point out and classify them a little bit higher than just sort of a standard control deficiency, which is where the rest of the findings fall. In total, there were 8 material weaknesses. 5 of them were over the basic statements, disclosures, things like that, and then 3 of them were federal. In regards to federal compliance, when you have a material weakness in federal compliance, that usually leads to a modified opinion over the compliance for that particular program. There were 8 significant deficiencies. Again, out of those 8, 3 of those were federal. And then there are 5 compliance or other matters that don't rise to the level of a significant deficiency. Next slide, Mary. I wanted to take this time just because material weaknesses are, they are deserving of a little more attention, both from management and from governance. And so I did want to just briefly go over these 5 material weaknesses and just give you all just sort of a rundown. All of these were adapted from the findings that are in the CAFR, which has been released as public information. So the first one, 2019-001, this was actually a repeat finding going back to 2018, I believe. This is basically what we noticed was that the city, there were just lots of errors, and there were lots of schedules that didn't, like Deborah was saying, there were a lot of subledger schedules that didn't tie to the GL, didn't tie to the trial balance that we were given. So that caused a lot of these adjustments. And really in talking with management, working with Deborah and Mary, it really comes down to the lack of an effective month-end, quarter and annual close process, where the totality of the accounts are reconciled. There's support available for those balances. This is not to say that none of the accounts were reconciled. I mean, some of the important ones like cash, debt, those were okay. But this one just covers a lot of the other accounts, which we can get into as we go through some of these other findings. Mary, next slide. All right, so following from 2019-001, the previous finding, which is sort of an overarching finding, you could say. This is where we get into some specifics. So there were utility billings receivable and associated liabilities. In auditing these accounts, it was determined that there was not a timely reconciliation and an accurate reconciliation performed on these accounts. So after what amounted to a lot of work, we determined that the receivable account was misstated by about $1 million. So that led to an audit adjustment. There were some liabilities associated with the utility activity that had a balance of about $588,000, deposits in the amount of $876,000 were also not reconciled. So that just means that there wasn't supporting information for some of those liabilities. Mary, we can go to the next one. 2019-3, this is billing and recognition of federal revenue. So as part of our single audit procedures, we have to get comfortable with the SEFA. The SEFA is your schedule of expenditures of federal awards. We compare the underlying expenditure activity to the revenues that are recognized and reported in that schedule. What we found was that there was about $3.5 million worth of expenses that were higher than the revenues recognized. So what that tells us is that the city had incurred costs, but had not billed the federal government, the granting agency, for that money back. And a lot of these reimbursements had not been claimed within the period of availability of 60 days. So that's, that's money that the city's missing out on. 2019-4, construction process. Y'all have a lot of construction projects going on, across the city. The information that we got, it was just not at the detail that would allow us to determine whether that activity, is really still in process, or if some of that might have been for completed projects that need to be moved over to, capital assets and started to be depreciated. The information wasn't there, and that process was also not part of a periodic close. 2019-5, accrued liabilities, guarantees, and customer deposits. There were deposits of about $350,000 that we noted in the detail that we were provided that were dated, really, really far back. I mean, some of them back in like the 80s and 90s. So those liabilities are still sitting on the books of the city. And, whether that money is truly owed back to somebody who deposited it and didn't receive it, or if the deposit had actually been refunded and just not accounted for properly, we were not able to make that determination. And again, customer advances, about $2 million, had not been subject to the formal reconciliation. We did some work, did some research, and we ended up adjusting that account down by about $700,000. And that recognizes revenue on advances for projects. And when those projects are completed, you can recognize that revenue. But up until the point that it's completed, it's still technically a liability. So in the trial balance, the liabilities were high. This is where we get into our federal compliance findings. There's 3 of these. 2019-12 reporting for both the programs that we tested, which were the Airport Improvement Program and the CDBG program. There were just a lot of financial reports that we were unable to obtain. And if you look in the actual finding itself, the list is fairly comprehensive of the required reports. If you look at the compliance requirements for these programs that had not, we could not determine if they had been submitted. 2019-15, this is over program income. So for the CDBG program, there are monitoring requirements when you have subrecipients of these grants that are using the grant funds to really generate money. So whether those funds are going to make loans and those loans are being repaid, there are monitoring requirements that the city has to perform over those subrecipients, and that documentation was also lacking. All right, and 2019-16, you have special tests and provisions. This is just sort of like a catch-all for anytime you have a federal program that has a lot of just sort of other requirements that falls into this. For the CDBG program, the city was required to have a citizen participation plan in place, and we were unable to obtain evidence that that was actually in place. The city was also found to not have evidence that HUD had approved the release of certain funds for 3 out of the 4 projects that we had tested. There's just a lot of paperwork involved in that, and there is a formal sign-off from HUD that is required. And then for the subrecipients of the CDBG grants, there are environmental reviews that are required to happen, and we were not able to obtain evidence that any of that had occurred. That was really it. I really just wanted to discuss those more significant findings with you all. Just open it up. I think it's great that Mary and Deborah and I are on the line. So if there's any questions from the committee, I'm happy to answer those at this time.
Okay, thank you. Mary, I have a question regarding reconciliations, just so that I have a clear understanding. So what we're talking about is, let's take, for example, the Chavez Center. They receive cash or checks or payment for using the Chavez Center. Does the reconciling take place there with their staff, or is it a combination between their staff and finance? And then, of course, you could use other examples too, like the utility department or parking, anybody that takes money in. Where does the reconciliation take place?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I'm going to ask Deborah to step in with some of the details, but I can give you just a brief context for the reconciliation process. So again, we have 70 different funds with multiple different accounts into those funds, as we discussed throughout the budget process. So it really does vary depending on the accounts that we're talking about. So I'll ask Deborah to give you a highlight, specifically touching on the items that you mentioned. Those are the account receivable reconciliations, which she gave you a bit of a highlight of earlier. So Deborah, do you want to weigh in with some of those details from what your staff does, what city staff does, as well as what our Treasury division assists with?
And Deborah, actually use the utilities, because we saw there was $1 million that. So if you can use that example, that would be better than the Chavez Center.
Also, can we have Deborah's title, please?
Yes, Deborah is the accounting officer for the city.
Mr. Chair, councilors.
Yes.
So to give you an illustration for utilities, utilities is a enterprise within the city. They have their own billing section. They bill out for the water of the city. And so their subledger is the UCIS system. They send out invoices and they are receiving in customer payments. So the reconciliation is done in-house in utilities. Their system right now, so we are talking FY19. So their system is communicating to E1, and it is translating over the data to E1. So really UCIS, which is the billing system, that's where your water bills go, and the GL system, which is E1, those two systems should balance. The reconciliation is done in-house with the utility department staff, but also they can call us and they can state, they're seeing there's a difference. They're not, they're looking, they also have the capability of not looking at the detail of their own internal system, which is UCIS. So for E1, they have the ability to go in and look at E1 and pull the GL. If they need assistance, they can reach out to us and we can also pull the GL. And then we together, this is where really you have a team effort. If there is a problem, is where they're communicating with us and we can be researching what we show in the GL. They can be researching what they show in UCIS. And as we can try to come up with what the difference is and what's causing it. And so the adjusting journal entries, let's say the problem is that UCIS is showing $5 million and the the general ledger is showing $6 million. That's a large variance, but I'm just using whole numbers. And let's say it's due to the fact that internal, how do I want to say this? Internal adjustments that are inside UCIS are not being communicated over to the general ledger. It could be credit memos, debit memos, or any type of transaction such as that. You can make a adjusting journal entry into the GL to true up the GL to match UCIS. That responsibility is also with the accountants that are at the utility department. They submit the journal entries to the finance department. We review their journal entry packet. If we have any questions, we go to them and have them explain it to us, possibly give us more information if the packet is missing something. Depending on the dollar amount, you may remember this in the past, where utilities comes to the finance committee and possibly council for approval of an adjustment at a certain dollar amount. So before it is actually made in the books, it comes to council to say, we have found the need to adjust the records, and do you approve? So at a certain dollar value, it comes before council. Once council approves it, it's made into the books. We review it, we approve it, it goes into the books, and the two systems are tied together once again. If it's a lower dollar amount that is not material, that does not need to go to council, then the finance department works with the utility department to make sure that the adjustments are correct and valid. And this is the proper move to do.
Thank you, Deborah.
Does that answer your questions?
On that point?
Okay, so as far as, go ahead, Councilwoman Romero Worth.
So if it goes to council, that's when we've seen it and written it off, certain levels of bills.
Mr. Chair, Councilor, yes, that is correct.
And was this problem created because we hadn't written off bills that should have been?
Mr. Chair, Councilor, no, that is not accurate.
Okay.
So one of the issues or concerns or problem areas was monthly or quarterly accounting close, the close schedule. But how much of that is in your control, and how much of that do you depend on these other departments like utilities and Chavez Center and whoever, land use? What's the breakdown? How much is in your control, and if they're not giving you or reconciling, what do you do in that case?
Do I answer that, Mary?
Mr. Chair, councilors, I can take the first stab at that. So there are certain accounts that are central for accounts receivable, which is what we've discussed so far, that our central cashier's office does process. There are others, as Deborah mentioned, that are detailed out for the Public Utilities Department that are the responsibility of the staff of that particular department. So then again, we can act as a resource or as a guide to work through some of these issues that were raised. I just want to highlight something that might be a little bit more simple to focus on as well. So as part of the month-end close process for the current fiscal year for FY20, we've recently been requiring for the month of July for invoices to be input. The deadline was Friday. And so we are working in FY21 for a 31-day close process. So the entire subsequent month to July, the entire month of August, we are working at different deadlines throughout the city for the finance staff, for city department staff. So if with our new Munis system, there is, we discussed with the committee and council before the three-way match process. This is one of the corrective actions after the McCard report identified that the same person could create a vendor, enter an invoice, and then pay out that particular amount due to the vendor. So the new system that we have has what is called a three-way match, where multiple different people for segregation purposes are part of this process. So a significant control is that a different person enters in the invoices and approves the invoice than the person that originated the purchase request. So in that case, by the middle of the month, we've asked the city staff to input and approve the invoices into the Munis system. So that does rely on city staff primarily to complete that process in order for us to accurately represent the expenses that were incurred for goods and for services that were rendered in the month of July. So this is, again, very simple step that we are taking now in the current fiscal year to move forward towards being able to understand where and very important, given our discussions through the budget process, to understand where our revenues sit each month compared to our expenditures as we're managing through the revenue fluctuations of the current year.
So Mary, is it fair to say that when we get these bad audit findings, it's not all on finance, but it's a citywide problem, not just a finance department problem?
Mr. Chair, councilors, everyone in the city who is involved in these processes does each play a role. As Deborah mentioned, for the public utilities staff, Ryan did highlight, Mr. Jones highlighted the findings on the land use guarantees for the liabilities that had been outstanding, some dating back into the 1980s. So as far as that is concerned, we do work with each of the different divisions, each of the different departments, and then the divisions within those departments as we are correcting for the findings that the independent auditor did identify. Similarly, Mr. Jones reviewed with you several of the federal, the material weaknesses around the federal funds. Very similarly, there's a portion of that does responsibility that does lie within the department. Very specifically what Mr. Jones reviewed with you about the participation plan, that wasn't financial in nature, that was a compliance issue that was flagged by our independent auditors. So it's really a mix, and it can vary depending on the specific process or the specific procedure that is being audited. But yes, I would say in the very general response to your question, that it is a mix of all staff, finance staff in various different divisions, as well as our city staff that works on these areas.
Okay, and then in an effort to respond to some of the findings related to the federal grants, both CDBG and then the airport, this is where we've talked about the reorg, creating this grants management division so that grants then will be centralized and you won't have a grant manager, say in housing, and then another one in airport, another one in public works. They'll all be centralized. So the reporting, especially as relates to the federal reporting, will all be centralized in finance. And so hopefully we will have more control, or you will in finance have more control over that aspect of it, and hope ultimately get less findings. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, I just want to clarify one thing that you did state. So the positions that were approved in the budget and as part of the reorganization plan that was discussed earlier are grant accounting specific positions. So departments like affordable housing, for example, still maintained a CDBG a specific position. Again, there's many aspects of compliance that fall outside of the financial reporting from start to finish, right, through that entire life cycle of the grant. So what the positions that were approved by, funded by council in the budget and are as well part of this reorg that is going before council are grant specific positions that will be centralized within the accounting, within the finance department rather, and those will be, again, very specifically assigned to assist with the financial reporting throughout the entire life cycle of the grant.
And so do you think that'll assist in addressing these specific audit findings that we had this year or last year?
Mr. Chair, yes, it will. Again, just want to remind the members that this was the FY19 audit. We are still working on the FY20 close, you know, again, with the assistance of our staff, city staff, finance staff, as well as our contractors. So that is, we have a very concerted effort to favorably respond in a proactive manner to these audit findings with corrective action for 20, but really the focus of these new positions will be in 21. And yes, you know, as soon as the audit was completed over the summer, and as soon as we recognized that there were significant material weaknesses for the federal grants, we did add that piece to the FY21 budget proposal as very specific response to these audit findings.
Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions. Questions from the committee. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, staff, for the information and also the auditors to break it down for us, just to understand the nuances. I guess what I was taking from this, just seeing especially the grant reporting aspect and serving on the CDC is, especially for the CDBG grants, a piece of that, well, two things I see that have been problematic. HUD changes their rulings, their rules, and it's so crazy that you can't even like keep up with their reporting standards, and it also depends on the administration for HUD. So that's an issue. And then I see us internally as having short staffing issues, which then resulted in confusion for these, the findings. So I think it contributed to that. So I don't think, I guess the auditors, they don't take that into consideration, do they? Do you? You just basically see where there's inconsistencies and reporting deficiencies, and then just flag that versus going into the details as to why things occur the way they do?
Sure. So that's a good question. Yeah, it's really our job to look at the compliance requirements and just ask the question, you know, how did you comply with this requirement? It's hard sometimes because, you know, sometimes I see, you know, local government agencies that are, you know, understaffed. It's not really my position to say, you know, what an adequate level of staffing is, but you know, it's tough. It's tough, and like you mentioned, compliance requirements are always changing. So I don't want to say that, well, I could say that nobody on my team is unsympathetic to that, but it's just not really our, you know, we would not reword a finding or, you know, somewhat soften it, you know, to say, well, you know, there just weren't the right people in place, or, you know, there's not enough people in place. That's not really our role in an audit.
Thank you for the clarity. I mean, I think we could break it down and figure out like what are next steps to improve upon these findings and make sure it doesn't happen again. So I guess this is to staff based on specifically the reporting requirements, the airport grant and the CDBG grant. What are some of the things that you think we would be adjusting based on these findings. And I think just to add to the chair's statement about the grants management and centralized, I think that helps in terms of like organizing, finding out all the grants and requirements, but that's one person, and they also rely on the staff that's overseeing that grant. So I'm just curious, they still have to work in unison. So what are you seeing as the grant management person then intersecting or working with the actual staff that are overseeing the grants? Because we're not going to give them all the responsibility of these grants and the reporting aspects of it. So how do you see them working together?
Mr. Chair, Councilor, thank you for pointing that out, that it is a partnership, especially when it comes to the grants, with the staff that is on the ground managing how these dollars are spent, as well as, our accounting, the new grants management division accountants. And so more specifically to answer your question, as we work through that partnership, the role of the staff and the grants management division will be to prepare the monthly grant fund reconciliations. Deborah did spend time reviewing how detailed those reconciliations are and how time consuming those are. Our role would also be to track the allowable grant expenditures, to review any type of reimbursements that are outstanding for that particular period of performance, generally done on a quarterly basis. But some grants do have a monthly reporting period as well. And then again, just in general, to ensure that we are complying with federal regulations, and then requesting those reimbursements to the city, especially now, right, as we are moving forward into FY21. We want to make sure that we are timely with requesting those reimbursements. Most acutely in front of us, we do have the prospect of receiving CARES Act funding from via the feds through the state. And so we do have a pretty short window for that, as is determined by the federal law. We have until December 30 to get those dollars out the door. And I guess importantly, in the reimbursement world, we are able to ask for reimbursement for eligible expenses going back to March. So that would really help us with closing our FY20 fiscal year for some of those expenses that we did incur related to to COVID-19. So again, this is extremely timely as we are working through reduced revenues and all of our different funds, but being able to get those federal reimbursements back into our accounts in a timely manner is extremely important, especially over the next few years as the city will see continued shortfalls.
Great. And so the grants management accountant, is that what you said that you called the person? And has that person been hired?
Mr. Chair, councilors, that was part of the budget approval. And so that I think our staff is now working on the job descriptions together with HR, and we'll be posting those positions shortly.
So in that job description, is it going to lean heavily on somebody that actually has a lot of experience working with federal grants versus
Mr. Chair, councilors, yes, absolutely. Hit the nail on the head there. We really are going, especially because of the material weaknesses in the audit, but in addition to that, with prospects for CARES Act and any additional federal funding as we're moving through the response efforts, these are critical on the ground folks that we need to activate, and again to assist in partnership with our city staff as well.
We're talking about more than one position though, right? Because I heard Councilwoman Villarreal say one position, but I heard you say positions.
Yes,
What
there will be, Mr. Chair, yes, that is correct. There were a few positions approved, funded in the budget, and that are up for discussion through the reorg process.
So more than one grant person we will be hiring.
Mr. Chair, I believe we will be hiring 3 grant accountant positions.
Thank you for that clarity. And I didn't catch that. Yeah, I think just based on the different reporting requirements for federal grants, and unfortunately, none of them are consistent with each other. So I think that makes it hard. And hopefully that the grant management folks will have an understanding of all those nuances and obviously work with our staff. And maybe that will help with the short-staffed and the understaffed situations that we've had in departments that I think have contributed to this. The other piece was the utilities situation. Does the fact that we have these, you all are connecting with the billing department and they are doing their own reconciliation. So is there a need to create, I guess, like a policies and procedures document to like go step by step and figure out how everybody is connected, and so that there's a understanding of the flow? Or is there already something in place and we just haven't really followed it?
Mr. Chair, Counselor, we do have procedures in place. We obviously everything can be improved upon, like you said. There is a part of the flow that relies not just for utilities, but for all departments, as we've discussed, with the department versus the accounting division, as things are reconciled across several different accounts. So I hear you loud and clear, and our accounting officer Deborah has been conducting trainings and making these changes for best practices. Again, we're focusing now on the FY20 year-end close process ahead of CLA coming back in a few months to do the FY20 audit. So again, the training continues, the improvement continues, but I do hear you loud and clear that documentation, a very robust documentation process is needed. So that's something that we can, similar to what we've done in the procurement world, focus on as we move forward and continue to make these changes and these improvements.
And that the whole piece, thank you for that. I think that's a really important aspect. Maybe not call it policies, because I don't want people to confuse it that it's our role to do that, but like a procedures document, step by step, a checklist, if you will. I don't know. But I was thinking about the adjustments for those that come to us to council for outstanding. They're basically collections or fines or ways that we wouldn't be able to collect the money that is owed to us for various circumstances. So we basically write it off, but I'm still confused how that contributes to the problem. Or did you say that did not? Is it the timing that the staff would get that and the reconciliation just didn't happen in a timely manner? Because we've seen a couple of those, but we're just assuming that staff is going to then move that forward and then take that off the books and that everything would be copacetic. But it sounds like, I don't know what's missing there.
Mr. Chair, Council, I can take again stab at setting the context, and then I would actually ask Mr. Jones to weigh in on that specific finding and some of the details on that. So again, with the write-offs, as Councilor Romero Worth indicated, that is something that staff identifies and then works with the department staff identifies and then works with the finance department to then review and document. There is one that we are, that public utility staff has identified that we need to process that is outstanding. There is, again, a lot of detailed work that goes into that particular process. We can ask our staff to, very similar to how Deborah broke out the reconciliation process into a few different steps, to review that in a very succinct way with the committee so you understand all of the detailed work that both the public utilities department staff has had to go through to come up with that amount, and then as well as our finance department to review what they have put together even before it comes to council. So I know public utility staff has worked on one that we are going to be reviewing as well. Given COVID and the status of the FY19 audit, we've asked them to hold off until this point, and actually received an email from Mr. Jones, the Public Utilities Director, within the last week, reminding us about that. So we're going to assume that review at this time. But I'd like to turn it over to Ryan Jones at this point to review some of the details about that particular finding with the committee.
Sure. So thanks, Mary. And So Deborah did a good job at the beginning of our discussion here, just talking about reconciliation, subledgers, and general ledgers. So in this particular instance, there was a balance on the general ledger in the trial balance that we were provided. And so the question was asked, okay, where's your supporting schedule? Where's the subledger support for this balance? And so when we did receive that support, we looked at the total of the subledger, which I can't give an opinion on it, but I think that it seems to me that that subledger is actually being managed. What didn't happen was that the general ledger was not updated to reflect the balance in the subledger. So we did not perform procedures to determine if receivables had been written off, anything like that. This was just really an accounting entry to get the general ledger and therefore the balance in the financial statements to match what that subledger said, because a subledger is usually more reliable than a general ledger, because a subledger will, a general ledger will just be numbers, it'll just be accounting entries. But in this particular instance, your utilities receivable balances, it's like a list of people, Joe Smith owes X dollars for this service, and so on and so forth. So when we took the sum of all of those amounts owed by actual people, and we compared that to the general ledger, that's where that discrepancy was, which resulted in the audit adjustment. And we did perform procedures on the subledger balances. So we did test that, and so that's how we're comfortable with the subledger, and therefore we wanted to post the entry so that the financial statements reflected the subledger, not this general ledger that just had not been updated to match that listing.
Right. That was helpful. Thank you for the clarity.
Sure.
I guess just other questions had to do with like construction and process balances. I don't know. I don't remember that slide, but I wrote it down. I can't remember what it's. Do you recall? Can you, Mr. Jones, do you have that slide? It was about material weaknesses, but. Construction, it was about the construction.
Sure.
piece.
I don't have the slide in front of me, but I can tell you what the issue was.
Right.
It's fairly it's kind of basic. So there was a comprehensive reconciliation performed on capital assets, and included in that was essentially a reconciliation of just the total number, more of like a GL reconciliation than like going back to the subledger example. What I would expect to see to support construction and process balances. So say it's, I forget how much it was, like 24 million. I think you had $24 million in projects in process at year end. So, we had a schedule that showed the beginning, we saw additions, deletion. I don't think there were deletions, but there were additions, and then you have this ending number. And so our question was, what projects are these? Where's a schedule that says, project A, B, C, and D all have balances and that support that total number of 24 million. And we did receive I would say it was a partial schedule. I think that process is there sort of in the finance and accounting infrastructure. It just wasn't completed in time for us to perform our audit procedures on it.
Mr. Chair, Councilor, to add in as part of the corrective action for this particular finding, our staff is working with the public works staff. We have a certification, capital project certification form that outlines some of the data points that Mr. Jones was reviewing with you. There's about 10 different data points that we are requiring to be able to build those schedules out for each of the capital projects. This is part of the FY20 year-end close process. So again, everything from beginning and ending dates to the specific line items to the PO numbers that were used in 20 that were carried forward into FY21, if it's associated with any federal or state capital outlay dollars, the different phases of the project, percent completion, what stage of the process it's at, if it's design or construction, and then other, relevant pertinent information, again, to be able to build that out. So we have that information for each of these projects for FY20 as of 6/30, 2020.
I guess what I'm hearing from that description and what you're describing and the need for certain, not for lack of a better word, checklist to make sure that we're following the steps. I'm still kind of hearing that because we've had this problem for a while about just the project management and not so much about the lack of project management, but the lack of staff. And we've been short-staffed in that area for a while. And it seems I don't even know if it's getting better, but I think it has to do with just, again, the need for project management and the consistencies with staff that fall under that role. So that's what I'm concerned about. Again, this need to keep making sure that we have the right people doing the project management and that they're supported, and then also that we have enough staff. And Public Works has been that has been a hard point, I would say, for the last, I don't know, probably 2 years, maybe. I'm not sure. So is that something that we're thinking about? I don't know if that's really a finance question, but it's really kind of a management and how we're looking at utilizing our staff more efficiently and having enough staff to do this.
Mr. Chair, Councilor, I can just continue the conversation that we started at the beginning of the presentation to, I think Deborah is the one that mentioned, we've had turnover and the staffing issues that were challenges in FY19 continue into FY20 last fiscal year as well as 21. These are not just, concerns of the finance department and our staff, but citywide. So in agreement with you that these are important areas to be looking at, because then we can see what the impact will have. And again, it's part of this partnership that finance has with the departments to ensure that we have these lists to your point, a checklist of all the information that we need to then provide to the auditors, and that we are working in coordination with the staff in the departments to produce that for the auditors.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Director McCoy. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Councilwoman Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Jones. I'm wondering, I just took a look at the audit document sent to us. Could we get a copy of the document that Mr. Jones spoke from? I think that it's really a condensed, it's not the 150 pages I just tried to read. What, 300? I don't know how many it was, but I didn't read it very well in the last 4 minutes. But the question I do have is, I don't know if you can put any pages of that document back up, but there was a page that talked about $3.5 million in federal monies that if we could see that page again, I'd like to talk about it for a minute.
Hold on one second as I pull this up.
Thank you.
There you go. It's this first section, 2019-003.
Right. So I'm just trying to clarify, did we spend these monies and then we missed the time frame to be reimbursed for the monies that we spent?
Mr. Chair, Councilor, I'd just like to clarify, reimbursements were not claimed within the 60 days, but the reimbursements were eventually filed with the federal program.
So even though we didn't hit the 60-day period, did we eventually get the reimbursement?
Mr. Chair, Counselor, yes, those have been submitted to the Fed.
And have we gotten our money yet?
Mr. Chair, I will have to check with our Treasury Division on the status. This is a few different programs, I believe, that make up this 3.5 million. So before I misstate something, I want to confirm with our Treasury staff. And
Sure,
will
I
follow up with you
I
both.
understand that. So we've spent the money and we're looking to get reimbursed for it. We've requested the reimbursement, but we don't know for sure that because we missed the 60-day mark that we're going to be reimbursed. I don't know if these requests are time sensitive or, you know, if there's just a totally open-ended amount of time that you can ask to be reimbursed.
Mr. Chair, Counselor, all of these requests, in my opinion, are time sensitive. The ability for any type of reimbursement, whether it's federal revenue or state revenue or other revenue sources, is extremely important and crucial to the city's operation. This is something that, again, with additional staffing in our Treasury Department, as well as a continued focus for building this grants management division with our grant accountants focused on this reimbursement, we will be improving going forward because this is extremely important to the city. And we absolutely need to be more timely in our reimbursement requests to feds, states, any of them.
I understand that. Mary, would you just make a little note to find out if we have received any of those reimbursements and give us an update of where we are with those? Like if we're 60 days out or 90 days out or 120? Because my concern is that we aren't going to get reimbursed and we've spent that money already. So I'm not saying that that has happened or that it will happen. I'd just like to make sure that it doesn't happen. And I think that, like I said, this document is really concise and quick. And if we could get a copy of that, that would be helpful to all of us. In fact, probably the entire council should receive one. Chair, that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilwoman Romero Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So with regard to the federal grants, what is the underlying issue there? Is it, so Councilor Villarreal speculated, she didn't ask you directly. I'm just curious, were there new requirements? Are these new grants? Is it structural? Is it changing requirements? Is it too much work for the amount of staff we have? I guess that it would help to know why we had trouble here and whether what we're doing will remedy the situation.
So, Mr. Chair, Counselor, what I can do again is take an initial stab at setting the context. I'm going to ask that Mr. Jones review the material weaknesses around the federal compliance that he went over with you earlier. So again, this spans, various different federal programs from airport to transit to CDBG, Community Development Block Grant from HUD. So I will let Mr. Jones speak to exactly what was reviewed. He spoke to it in general terms earlier about the requirements that were set forth and then the review that the independent auditors did to ensure the city was complying with those requirements. What I will speak to briefly is staffing levels and then the workload. So within these programs, within the period of review for FY19, we did have significant turnover. Again, as we mentioned, specifically in the finance department, there were about 5 different staff people assigned to grants. 2 were assigned full-time to grants. And then within this period of review, that staffing dropped down to 1 person dedicated to grants. Similarly, in some of these other programs, we have seen staff turnover, staff with a few years of experience that has left the organization. I know that was the case with CDBG. With airport, we have also had new staff assume the responsibilities for at the airport for some of the compliance areas. And most recently, what's going to impact us in FY20 is that the manager, Keith Wilson, in charge of the grants for transit, has left the organization. So that's, again, multiple years of experience that has departed the organization. So just some context setting for some of the areas, we can never really replace that institutional knowledge. But to Councilor Villarreal's point, we can, as part of the job description, set a number of years of experience in federal grant financial reporting, specifically for the grant accounting positions that we will be hiring to try to compensate for that. But each organization's grant history is, again, very unique to the organization. So we can't really replace that institutional knowledge, for example, of our transit grant manager that has recently departed. So Mr. Jones, if you can speak to some of the federal compliance, the actual findings of what you, I believe the question was around the requirements and if they were changing, or if there's anything else I left out, Councilor can jump in.
Sure. We talked about the 300-page report, right? So if you look at the findings in the CAFR, I did my best in the PowerPoint that Mary shared with us to summarize, to really condense what was the big problem here. So it all really comes down to you need a person or a group of people who are intimately familiar with the programs, with the requirements. And so you get compliance requirements from many different angles. You'll have compliance requirements that are set forth in the compliance supplement. So those do change, well, they can change every year. They don't necessarily change, but they do change. So you have those sort of general federal requirements. What you also run into with these grants is the individual grant agreements will sometimes have additional compliance requirements, additional reporting requirements. If you look at those, specifically the reporting finding, I think it's 2019, I want to say it's either 15 or 16. There's actually a list for each of the programs that we tested, the CDBG and the Airport Improvement Project. There's a list of the reports that we were unable to obtain or to see that had been submitted, and it's a really long list. So again, it's not my job to say you need 4 staff people working on this all the time. But I will say that you do need somebody who can spend the time and understand all of these requirements, because they're immense. I mean, specifically for CDBG, I mean, you have so many reporting requirements for that program. It's important to have sort of a gatekeeper, somebody who knows what reports need to be submitted. One of the issues we were running into with our requests is that, and granted, this was during I guess you could say the height of COVID, right? So there were a lot of people off site. It just didn't seem like a lot of the information, a lot of the files for these grants were complete. There were a lot of incomplete files that were provided, incomplete sets of reporting documentation, and it does seem that's what's lacking at the city, is just having either a person or a group of people or a department or division dedicated, maybe not full time, but at least partially to ensuring that the city's complying with these requirements. Because once you start having these material weaknesses, you do run the risk of not obtaining future funding. It doesn't happen all the time. It doesn't happen often, but it's certainly a possibility. And so it's really a good investment to either designate a person or a group of people with that responsibility. Did I answer the question?
Mr. Jones, Counselor, I've displayed the list that Mr. Jones was referring to. Again, this is everything from a citizen participation plan to environmental reviews. So again, it speaks to Counselor Villarreal's checklist comments earlier. So what are the requirements either of the grant or the specific agreement of the agency or the specific grant agreement? And then what is that checklist? And I think you guys have heard me mention this before. If there isn't a paper, it's not auditable, right? So if we need that documentation to then be able to provide, whether it's reconciliations or a citizen participation plan to the auditor, so they're able to test these requirements.
So moving to the very in-depth explanation around utilities. So you have in-house UCIS system that needs to balance with the GLEI system. Did I get that right?
E1.
E1. Sorry, I wrote EI. And one is done in-house at utilities, and then it jumps over to you at finance. Is that right?
Mr. Chair, Counselor, yes, we have different roles in that. Primarily, the reconciliation is done within utilities staff from that subledger, the UCIS system.
UCIS, and those two things need to balance. And there was some problem with communication between the in-house UCIS and the finance located GLE1.
Mr. Chair, Counselor, yes, the entire city uses, not just finance, the E1 accounting system for FY19. So that was the subledger that Deborah was explaining would be the UCIS system, and then the general ledger would be the what we often refer to as the legacy, the antiquated E1 accounting system.
So wait, which one is the modern one? The E1 or the UCIS, or neither?
Mr. Chair, Counselor, both are quite antiquated, so neither are modern. I do believe that the committee has heard presentations or parts of presentations where Director Jones has referred to future work on the utility billing system and potential for upgrades of that system.
Yeah,
very
okay.
similar to.
Yeah, and that's the one we've had problems with. Okay, see, we hear these things in isolation, and then we get these big picture things, and then they start to make sense. It's amazing. So, what do we have? Are there internal controls between the in-house at utilities and the E1 at, I don't know, when it gets transferred? Like, how do we know the integrity between the two?
Mr. Chair, Counselor, I can speak to general context setting, and then I'll ask Mr. Jones to review specifically that finding and what his team reviewed. So in general, as the UCIS system is the subledger for the utility billing, that does have to, what we often refer to in tie out, that has to equal, that has to balance the total of that to what is in the general ledger. And so when when we are not able to provide that documentation for those amounts being in balance, that's, I guess I'll ask Mr. Jones to, step in and to review that particular finding and why that was a material weakness.
Sure. So thanks for the question. I think in going back to your question, Counselor, about what is the internal control. The internal control in that reconciliation process, which is essentially what we're describing here. It's taking one set of information, comparing it to another set, and then trying to get the two to jive. The internal control would be you're going to have internal controls in place on the utility side. So you don't want someone necessarily doing the reconciliation or making the adjustments. If somebody is doing the reconciliation, say in utility, and they're looking at E1 and say, oh, these numbers don't match. This is the change that needs to happen. The internal control in place would be that journal entries can't be posted by that person. That person could say what the journal entry needs to be, what does that adjustment need to be, but that person should not be posting that to the general ledger. So this is where you get a good review process, and you incorporate that in part of your monthly, quarterly close. You get another set of eyes on it and say, okay, does this make sense? Does something not look right? Is something suspicious going on? You ask a lot of questions when you're doing a reconciliation, like why don't these numbers match? Why are we having to post this adjustment? And then it's up to that reviewer to say, okay, I agree with this, and then that gets posted to the general ledger. So at the end of that process, the two systems match.
And do we have that, or we don't have that? Or we just have a problem?
Mr. Chair, go ahead.
Sorry, Mary. So the problem as we saw it, and is described in the finding, is that that reconciliation process just had not occurred. So it didn't get to the step of somebody identifying the variance and needing to make that adjustment. That variance was not identified.
And is that a problem that's been there for a long time, or just newly identified, or you have no idea?
So the very first finding that we discussed, it's the finding numbers are interesting. So it's 2019-1, but I believe that finding dates back to either 17 or 18. So there have been reconciliation findings in the past, just sort of general reconciliation findings. So I would say that this is not a new issue. It might have just been a bigger issue this year. Sometimes reconciliation problems don't always rise to the level of a material weakness. Sometimes they're not even a significant deficiency if it's off by, a couple $100. Lots of times we don't even care about that as auditors. We have materiality considerations, but when you're looking at a difference of $1 million between systems, that's why that finding got that specific finding for the utilities accounts receivable was sort of separated from that general lack of reconciliation finding and stated separately, just because really just due to the adjustment that we had to make in order to accurately state your financial statement.
So I guess what I'm trying to understand is, Mary, first of all, I know how hard you work. I know how hard your staff works. I know when I was elected, what a mess our house was in. And we knew that because of the McCard report. And so I also know that the level of things that were problematic and that were identified in the McCard report were not going to be fixed overnight. And I know that you all have been working really hard to right the ship, so to speak, and to put the things in place that professionalize us, that bring up the systems. And I guess what I'm trying to do is put this particular audit in that context. Like, how soon before we stop seeing this stuff? How much of it dates back before your time, my time with the city, and is just part of an ongoing process? How much will we will we see in 2020 still kind of lingering, recognizing again that this stuff, you don't fix it overnight. I mean, we get complaints all the time about things that we're aware of, we're working on, hardworking professional people are dealing with. And we've got to be patient. We've got to keep working at it. We have challenges, be they staffing or funding or expertise. And I know you're working on it. And so I guess I'd like some general comment about the bigger picture that we're living in and working in.
Mr. Chair, Councilor, first of all, thank you for recognizing how hard our staff works. We're very appreciative. We went over the numbers with you about the number of staff that we have assigned to the accounting division in particular, but I think we've reviewed with you throughout the 2-week budget process, the staffing levels for each of the different departments and divisions. And I think John Romero earlier spoke very candidly about how much we appreciate our staff on the front lines that are doing this work and are working sometimes into the weekends and late nights to be able to complete these activities. So the reason we included the timeline in the beginning of the presentation was really to provide that context of where we've been over the last 3 years alone, and really starting with the fraud risk assessment that was conducted with the McCard report. If we look at the audits previous to the 2017 audit, there were relatively few findings, relatively few material weaknesses that were identified. But then the McCard report was published. The administration and the leadership at that time, my predecessor and others, we give a lot of kudos to them to recognizing these red flags and then bringing in a professional team like the McCard accounting firm to review this, to let us know where we did have those risks. And that was ultimately what that study was a fraud risk assessment. And so then with those multiple findings, we were able to identify some relatively low-hanging fruits, some areas that were already in progress, like the implementation of the Tyler Munis system. So that's been, if we can just focus on that, that's been a multi-year process. First with securing the funding, prioritizing the funding, and then going through the RFP process, selecting the vendor, actually implementing the system as well, to the point where we were able to go live with a financial system last year in July. And so again, that will really help us to be able to clear up some of these internal control process findings that the city has had for multiple years. So again, that's an example of a multi-year process that required multiple staff from various different departments. Again, we spoke around this time last year about the challenges in implementing the system because we were requiring staff to assume responsibilities, whether it be requisition entry or invoice entry or approval, things that they were not required to do before, but they have since risen to that challenge and accepted that challenge with the new system for one fiscal year in its entirety now. So that really will help with our internal control, documenting our internal controls. Now we do have a different person entering and requesting the purchase from the person that is approving the payment, the invoice and the payment of that invoice. So some items were very, very quick to clean up. I think one of the items that's very vivid in my memory from the McCard report was the sticky notes, right? Folks would write things on sticky notes. And so then that was documented as a risk. And so that's a much easier item to stop doing. As far as this particular audit and the findings, again, to put things into context, the finding about the guarantees and land use. These are, again, date back to multiple decades. And so this is something that we requested budget for in FY21. So we're going to be able to hire in a contractor, a CPA firm, to assist us with those reconciliations. This is something we really, Deborah actually, I owe her a lot of credit, dug into this last year with some, level of detail, and went through a process of being able to reconcile for two of the individual items. But it is very, she can tell you, it's very time consuming. It does require, a high level of expertise to do. So they're going to be working in conjunction with finance staff as well as land use staff to make sure that the appropriate documentation is in place and that we are able to review what has transpired over a few decades. So again, something like that has been multiple decades in the making, and we are, with council's approval, able to allocate and bring in the experts to work, CPAs in particular, to work with our city staff to clear up this audit finding. So it's across the board. I hope that was able to provide some level of context to what is, a little bit simpler and easier to resolve, and things that are just a little bit more time consuming and complex.
Thank you. Thank you for your work, Mary. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez, you did have your hand up, but you took it down. Did you want to ask anything?
No, Counselor Romero Worth covered it for me. So thank you, Counselor. I appreciate it.
Okay, well, Mary, thank you, and thank you to the committee. It's been a long night, but this is something that's very important to all of us and is our job, quite frankly, as the Finance Committee. I think, Mary, you did a really good job when it came to maybe not throwing certain staff under the bus or areas that aren't in the finance department, but I think we all recognize that there are lots of things out of your control. I want to thank Councilwoman Villarreal for your understanding of your expertise on grants and CDBG and how complex that is, because I didn't realize that it was, and indeed the auditor has confirmed that, yeah, those rules and regs are changing all the time. So I think we're all going to be challenged in keeping up with those changes, especially as you create this division. But I look forward to us continuing to address these findings. And on that note, Mary, will you be giving us an update in 6 months? Wow, we're going to have another audit soon, right? So what's kind of the timeline now moving forward?
Mr. Chair, thank you for that question. We look forward to having a trial balance ready for the CLA staff to review in October. And then that will set us up for about a 2-month collaboration with all of our departments to provide the auditors, the external auditors, CLA, with the appropriate documentation as they begin their review again. And our target is the middle of December to have the FY20 audit completed and submitted to the state auditor. So yes, Mr. Chair, we can provide you with updates as we move forward.
Okay, and that will be on time. If we make that December deadline, our audit will be submitted on time then.
Mr. Chair, yes, that is correct. Deborah and her staff are working furiously, as counselors have recognized long hours. Really, a lot of kudos goes to her and her staff for setting up training, setting up deadlines, making sure that we have the appropriate documentation. And again, all of us in finance working as partners with our city staff as well. So when it is their responsibility, they are able to provide the appropriate documentation as well.
Okay, great. And thank you, Deborah, for your presentation and explanation of reconciliations and what exactly it takes. It's pretty complicated, and I appreciate the way you broke it down and made it understandable for us. So with that, that'll conclude our presentation on the FY19 CAFR. We are on to matters from staff. Is there anything from staff, Ms. McCoy?
Mr. Chair, councilors, we were hoping to have an update on our June GRT. Staff did check a few times today, and that had not been posted on TRD's websites, but we do expect that report to be coming from from Taxation and Revenue Department and the payment and the distribution this week. So we will document that in a memo as we have done and include the source documents for the committee to review when we do receive that information and the disbursement from TRD. Again, that we look forward to having that this week.
And on that point, can we get that when you get it, when it's ready?
Yes, absolutely.
Ahead of the next committee meeting, that'd be great.
Okay, great. Matters from the committee. Okay, then our next meeting is August 31st. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.